The modification surgery had officially begun. The Legion apothecary injected the youth with anesthetic until he slipped under, then opened his chest with a scalpel and connected him to a bank of life support instruments. Implanting the gene seed is the first step in Astartes modification, technically the simplest and safest. For Magnus's gene seed offspring, though, it had become a perilous procedure. Back on Holy Terra, Thousand Sons' gene modification had proceeded like that of other legions. There had been no trouble. They had even taken part in quelling a rebellion there. But as the Great Crusade unfolded, Magnus's gene seed began to falter. Strange flesh mutations appeared, and the success rate of creating new Astartes declined, as if some curse had attached itself to the Legion. Where earlier implants produced neat spherical specimens, later harvests grew small tentacles, a grotesque, almost octopus-like appendage. The Legion still produced warriors, but the near-perfect prototype had vanished. Throughout the implantation, Mr. Axis kept a hand on the youth's forehead, channeling his chi energy into the boy as the apothecary worked. The gene receptacle went into the chest cavity, the gene seed was placed inside, and immediately began to rewrite the boy's genome. His body shook violently. The apothecary watched the monitoring panel with white-knuckled anxiety, prepared for another disaster. The readouts, though, remained within normal ranges. With Mr. Axis's chi energy purifying the implant site, the mutation effect seemed to have been driven out. "Look, look," one of the apothecaries cried. "The gene seed, the shape of the gene seed has changed. Where the implanted organ had originally sprouted small fleshy tentacles, they now retracted and vanished under the cleansing influence. Magnus's gene seed had assumed the lost, perfect form, a smooth spherical mass of tissue. "This is the ideal gene seed," Ahriman said, his voice tight with an emotion almost like awe. He had been one of the earliest Astartes to undergo the process back on Holy Terra, and he remembered the Gene Father's original creations. For reasons no one could explain, that flawless prototype had stopped appearing after the earliest extractions. Subsequent seed implants developed those strange tentacles. No later re-extraction ever reproduced the perfect shape. It was as if only the very first harvest, taken when the Primarch was young, could yield the textbook specimen. This perfect seed was fully compatible with the boy. There was no latent danger. The youth's vital signs steadied. The apothecaries sutured quickly. The first operation of the day was done. Once this soldier recovered, the rest of the modification program could proceed. "This is marvelous, Axis. My vision was right. You truly can help me," Magnus said, face alight. "Bring the next recruit. I want to see how many of them we can save." The second, third, and fourth recruits were brought in, boys as young as 10, some in their early teens. Mr. Axis moved among them with the same ritual. Chi energy to cleanse, then implantation of the restored, perfect gene seed. Over the course of 10 hours, they completed more than 30 surgeries. Every single recruit accepted their seed flawlessly and passed the first stage of conversion. "Praise the Gene Father! Our Legion may gain at least 20 new Astartes," an apothecary said with restrained glee. He chose a conservative estimate because later stages still carried risk. "No," Magnus replied with unusual certainty. "I see 30. All of them will be perfect." In several possible futures, Magnus's prescience had shown him exactly that. The recruits implanted that day would all mature into Thousand Sons warriors. Mr. Axis, who'd been working tirelessly, paused to purify the spent gene seeds with his chi energy. While he tended the young bodies, he felt something else, an alien influence nested within the tissue. It was not ordinary warp energy. It was stranger, stronger, and harder to detect. Only by working so close with his chi had he managed to expel it from the implants. Magnus's own gene seed had been infected. Something had been trying to leach into these new, perfect seeds as well. If Axis had not been there in person, he might never have noticed. He felt a cold unease. There was a larger hand behind this intrusion, a conspiracy of malevolent intent. In truth, he regretted having come to Magnus. The Primarchs and their gene works were obvious targets for chaos, and Magnus, with his prodigious sorcery and affinity for the warp, was particularly vulnerable. Mr. Axis had stripped 30 seeds of contamination for now, but he could not promise they would remain uncorrupted forever. Once these recruits became full Astartes, they would begin to grow their own gene seeds and would be harvested periodically, Every 5 years, the seed taken from the thyroid gland, and combat and psychic practice could open the way for reinfection. Still, in the moment the implants were clean and stable, Magnus was elated. Leman Russ, who had come to the world in person, was equally eager. The Wolf King's own gene line suffered from its own taint, the werewolf mutation. That affliction was rarer and still controllable, but it existed, and if Mr. Axis's chi could purify Magnus's gene seed, perhaps it might help Russ as well. "I am glad to help Magnus," Mr. Axis said, but inwardly he was already planning a quick departure and thinking of contingencies. He did not intend to stay with the Thousand Sons any longer than necessary. Magnus's enthusiasm led him to ask for more. He wanted Mr. Axis to remain and help cultivate a reserve of safe gene seeds. Russ, too, promised to stay a while. He and Mr. Axis would remain on the world for over a month. During that time, Magnus hoped Axis could perform as many purifications and implantations as possible so they could start producing a stock of uncontaminated seeds. Ahriman, watching with hungry eyes, wanted more than a month. He envisaged Mr. Axis as a permanent asset to the Thousand Sons. At the Great Crusade's outset, Magnus's seeds had been perfect. Only later had the mutations appeared. If Mr. Axis could neutralize that corruption, keeping him in the Legion might cure the problem for good. Ahriman's ambitions, however, collided with Russ's. Russ had no intention of surrendering a Wolfguard captain. "Axis," Ahriman said bluntly, "you are invaluable to the Thousand Sons. I propose you stay here as a long-term exchange, an intern of sorts." "An exchange?" Magnus brightened at the thought. The Astartes did sometimes exchange officers between legions. It was not without precedent. Mr. Axis smiled tightly. "I am a Wolfguard captain. My company is being formed. Even an exchange would require me to serve my Wolf Lord for decades. I cannot leave for that long." Russ barked some laughter and waved the offer away. "No, he stays with the Wolfguard. We can send 10 Astartes to relieve him for a time," Magnus began, eager to bargain. Russ dismissed even that. Not 10,000 sons, not 100 would pry Mr. Axis away from his command. For Russ, his men were not bargaining chips. The mood soured. Ahriman, impatient and supremely confident, stepped forward to intervene. The gesture was too much. Magnus's expression hardened. "What are you doing, Ahriman? Russ is my brother, and Axis is a guest, not prey. Stand down." "I speak only for the Legion's future. Axis is crucial," Ahriman started. Magnus did not finish the argument with words. With a crack of psychic force, he smashed a storm of power into his gene sun, and Ahriman collapsed instantly, unconscious. It was a public rebuke. Magnus would not have his will flouted, not over a man. A handful of Thousand Sons moved to restrain and carry Ahriman away. Magnus's face was stern but controlled when he turned back to Russ and Mr. Axis. "I will not force you. I only ask that while you are here, Axis, you continue to help purify as many gene seeds as you can and assist with the recruit conversions." Russ's expression softened at that. He had no desire to deny Magnus the work being done, and perhaps a little of his own pride took comfort in the idea that the Wolfguard's methods might be of use. Mr. Axis coughed once, then twice. "Lord Magnus, if I may speak with you in private." "Of course," Magnus answered. He bowed slightly and led Russ and Axis into a secluded chamber. "Lord Magnus," Mr. Axis said once the door closed, "I came here with a request. You can speak plainly, Axis. You did me a great service. If there's anything I can do in return, I will," Magnus said. "You're flattering me, Mr. Magnus," Axis replied. "You are the most powerful Primarch in psychic power, and Prospero has countless potent sorceries, doesn't it?" Magnus only smiled faintly. "You flatter me too much. My psychic power is strong, but it is only one of many. Prospero is an ancient world of psychers, generations of gifted minds left behind schools, grimoires, and techniques. There are many kinds of sorcery here, but they are of little use to someone who is not a psyker." Axis did not recoil from the word the way others in the Imperium did. Rogel Dorn, since his return, had been loud in his distrust of psychers, wanting them restrained. Axis knew better than to despise them outright. The Imperium needed psychers, navigators to sail the warp, astropaths to speak across light years, and the psychers who kept Gellar fields from collapsing, a terrible duty that burns at the soul of those who perform it. The Imperium used psychers at every turn, and yet they rarely received their due. Axis felt the contradiction, but he had no intention of lecturing the Primarch. I want you to help me make a soul projection, Axis said simply. I want a soul clone that can exist in the warp. Magnus's expression tightened with surprise. You want to use psychic power? You know what becoming a psyker means. There is no safe middle ground. You either serve the Imperium willingly, or you end up serving it regardless. Becoming a true psyker is not a thing one can usually acquire. He hesitated, then added more cautiously. There may be a way to awaken psychic potential using gene seed, if a subject adapts and can endure mutation. My gene seed is unusual. Had I been the first to find you and implant it, combined with your chi, your resistance to the warp might have been extraordinary. But soul projection is different. It demands an inherently powerful soul. Axis let the Primarch speak. Magnus's mind ran through possibilities, the way his own gene seed could awaken psyker powers in others, the risks of mutation, his regret at not having had the chance to test it on someone like Axis. But Axis was not asking to become a psyker permanently. He only wanted a projection to enter the warp on his behalf. Tell me plainly, Axis said, can you create such a projection that will exist in the warp and draw its power? Magnus considered. There is a spell for that. Some of Prospero's sorcerers made soul clones to explore the warp, to shield their primary selves from the worst of the taint. But the clone must be formed from a strong soul. If the soul is weak, the spell will fail outright. Even if it succeeds, destruction of the projection can leave the original in a prolonged weakened state, or worse, cause permanent damage. Axis met him without hesitation. My soul is strong enough. I want you to make the projection and let it extract warp energy. Magnus studied him a long moment. He had liked his first impressions of Axis and had no wish to see him harmed. I can help you, he said finally. But first, terms. If the spell succeeds, if your soul is strong enough, and the projection is released, I will require a service in return. 50 years in my legion. Axis smiled. I have a different proposal. In our world, chi is not unique to me. I can create a being imbued with chi for you, someone to serve in your legion permanently. Would that satisfy you? Magnus's eyes widened. You can make a chi entity? The Emperor told us chi was unique to you. If you can truly do this. He paused, the offer rearranging his calculations. An immortal servant aligned to his legion would be worth far more than 50 years of service from any one man. I can, Axis said. If you accept, we can proceed now. Magnus's grin was brief and sharp. Agreed. Now. Axis stood where Magnus directed. The Primarch raised his staff and drew on an immense reservoir of power, weaving a spell honed through centuries. The words were old as Prospero, and the pattern of the ritual was precise. When it broke over Axis, it felt like a living mirror had been taken of him. Something peeled a portion of his soul and set it free as a separate thing. In the warp, the soul took form as a shimmering spot of golden-green light. Axis felt it as a second self, distinct and yet inextricably linked. He concentrated, and the projection reached out into the warp. Where other souls would have been polluted and eaten by the roiling chaos, this projection interacted differently, filtering foulness into a purer flux. Axis sat cross-legged and began to experiment. Guided by the projection he had not expected to possess, he siphoned a measure of warp energy back into his body. The energy that entered did not corrode or rend. Instead, it transmuted into a strange golden-green power, psychic in nature, but cleansed through the action of his chi. His angelic halo, the strange ability he kept to himself, acted like a purifier, neutralizing the warp's taint and rendering its power usable. Magnus watched, astonished. The projection was not the weak, ephemeral thing most sorcerers managed. It had strength beyond many high-level psychers, on par with some of his most potent brothers in the Legion. He had expected to make a small, cautious precaution. Instead, he had released something formidable. This is extraordinary, Magnus breathed. What a strong soul you have to manifest such a projection. Axis bent his head with satisfaction. Thank you, Magnus. I will now fulfill my promise. Magnus's expression eased into a satisfied smile. It was a fair trade. I look forward to whatever you create for my legion. For Magnus, the spell had been simple. For Axis, it was the first time he had walked that strange interface between soul and warp and come away unscathed. Whatever came next, whether the coming fights with the Chaos Force small vendors or other devils of the warp, Axis had taken a new tool from Prospero. and Magnus had gained something unexpected in return. Magnus, could you prepare some of the best soil on Prospero and a few barrels of the highest grade nutrient solution and have them brought here? Axis asked. The priority was simple. Plant a cultivator for this magic pony, satisfy its demands, and get off Prospero as soon as possible. The best soil on Prospero? What do you need soil for? And nutrient solution? Magnus asked, genuinely surprised. He had expected Axis to recommend someone who could use Ki, not to be mysterious about planting things. You don't need to ask, Axis said. Just prepare what I asked for and send it over. When Axis fled Vegeta, he'd taken 20 cultivator seeds with him. So far, he had used only 2. Magnus bowed to the request and had his men fetch the materials. Tens of minutes later, a large quantity of rich black soil arrived, together with several barrels of a bright green nutrient solution. Once everything was set out, Magnus waved his subordinates away until only he and Axis remained in the chamber. I've prepared what you requested, Magnus said. Now tell me, what exactly are you planning? Are you going to let me use Chi? No, Axis replied. Chi is a very special force. It belongs only to me. Cultivators can use Chi, but they can't be grown without my Chi. Even if a cultivator tried to plant itself and then receive Chi, it wouldn't take. I've already tested that. Do's Chi couldn't spawn a new cultivator. I plan to cultivate a very special life form, Axis continued. I'll need some of your blood. Once it grows, it will recognize you as its master, effectively becoming one of your gene seed offspring. The notion clicked in Magnus' mind. Axis could endow an alien life form with Chi, or perhaps the power called Chi originated in these life forms. The thought flashed through him that Axis might have discovered Chi through contact with such an alien being. Don't overthink it, Axis said. The power of Chi is unique to me in the universe. This life form is the only organism that can hatch and use Chi because of me. They have permission to use it, and nothing more. He produced a single green cultivator seed from his robes. You're planting something? Is it a plant or an animal? Magnus asked, studying the seed. It's half plant, half animal, a very unusual organism that strengthens itself by absorbing the blood of other species. I will use your blood and my Chi to accelerate its growth. Without my Chi, it will not develop at all. If it succeeds, the cultivator will carry more than half of your genes and thus become one of your gene seed offspring. Magnus's eyes brightened. If it will take genes, then perhaps we can add something else, he said. What if we used a perfected gene seed, your Chi-purified prototype, and let the cultivator feed on that? While you accelerate growth with Chi, I'll feed it psychic energy from the outside. We might see something unexpected. Axis regarded him with a hint of surprise and admiration. The Primarch's scientific curiosity was peculiar but excellent. He agreed. Moments later, Thousand Sons warriors brought a flawless spherical gene seed. Axis had already perfected it. They dug a shallow pit in the black soil. Magnus placed the gene seed into the earth and set the cultivator seed on top. Axis buried it lightly, poured in a barrel of nutrient solution, and Magnus sliced his palm, letting a little blood seep into the soil. Only a little will do, Axis said. I will start the Chi activation. You channel psychic power into it. Magnus nodded and they began. Axis poured his supercharged Chi into the seed. The cultivator, the moment it was awakened, began to devour Magnus's gene seed and absorb the thin stream of psychic energy he provided. This incubation did not complete in minutes. Half an hour passed, with both of them feeding the growth, then an hour. They paused their transmissions. Magnus asked quietly, "Do you think it will develop superhuman organs, like a space marine?" Perhaps, Axis said. Gene seed was the origin of space marine modifications. Their superhuman organs developed from it. Magnus thought of the Blood Angel's ancient rites, implanting Sanguinius's gene seed, feeding recruits on his blood, and burying them in sarcophagi to let their bodies transform. This method of nourishing and awakening organs with blood and time echoed that, except here the recruits were not human, but a cultivator. He even entertained the idea, one day, back home, to try this with Russell's gene seed and cultivate a space wolf version of a cultivator. Hours passed. Axis fed nutrient solution repeatedly and called for more soil to be mixed in. Through his Chi perception, he felt a great, malformed growth forming under the earth. a massive red tumor over 3 meters across where a vigorous life was gestating. After 12 hours, the chamber's prepared psychic barrier vibrated in warning and the ground pot burst. When the dust cleared, a grotesque figure stood within the overturned soil. It was about 2.3 meters tall, crimson-skinned and powerfully built. Aside from pointed ears and its red skin, it had human eyes and otherwise few monstrous features, narrowing the possibility of suspicion. 2 hearts beat visibly in its heaving chest. Black carapace connection points rimmed its shoulders and torso. Its physique outstripped that of an ordinary Astartes. "Ha ha ha," Magnus said, pleased. "At least the skin color matches mine." The connection was immediate and unmistakable, the bond between gene seed and its offspring. This cultivator had been fashioned in some hybrid way into Magnus's gene seed offspring. Axis's role as the life-giver remained absolute, but the creature bore Magnus's inheritance. The red figure strode forward, knelt on one knee, and raised its head. "Father," it intoned. Axis chi perception confirmed that while Magnus's lineage predominated, Axis chi still held the ultimate authority. Like the other cultivators Axis had bred, even when fed Primarch blood and true gene seed, they answered foremost to the source of their life energy, Axis. Magnus tested it. "Can you use chi?" "Yes, father." The cultivator extended a palm and a sphere of blue-white chi materialized, hovering and humming with contained energy. Magnus felt elation at the sight. "And psychic power?" "I can use psychic power, father," the creature answered. "I have perfectly inherited your gene seed. I have inherited all of you." Its eyes glowed faintly with blue light, and objects in the room rose and drifted, an unmistakable display of psychic force. "Very well," Magnus declared. "From this day you are a member of the Thousand Sons Legion. You are my gene seed offspring." Axis watched as Magnus embraced his creation. The cultivator was the perfect gift the Primarch had hoped for, a living fusion of Axis's life-giving chi and Magnus's perfected gene seed and psychic heritage. It would be both an Astartes-born ally and, at the same time, forever tied to Axis's authority. "Mr. Axis, strictly speaking, will my special gene seed offspring be considered an orc?" Magnus asked, turning to Axis. "How could he be an orc?" Axis replied with a smile. "There's a very high proportion of human genes in him. You could even put him through a genetic test. His genetic purity is higher than some Abhumans. We judge orcs by their skulls." If the child had been a first-generation cultivator, Axis thought, then perhaps he would be an orc. But once Primarch blood or other gene seed was mixed in, that changed things. It was a pity the first cultivator had been produced by ordinary means. If Russ's blood had been used, the cultivator gene seed might not have been wasted. Cultivators eventually generate their own gene seeds when mature, but those gene seeds appear in the Warhammer universe, foreign to the Dragon Ball world, and in some ways resemble orc stock. Axis still had more than 20 gene seeds in reserve and had no intention of handing them out freely. He planned to try planting some on Catachan and keep the rest carefully preserved. In the meantime, he nourished them with his chi and kept them in stasis to maintain their vitality. "Yes, he grew up on Prospero. He's human through and through," Magnus said, smiling. "Isn't that right, Axis?" "What are you talking about, Mr. Magnus?" "Isn't this the gene seed offspring standing beside you? How would I know his origin?" Axis feigned bewilderment. "Ha ha ha, Axis, you have a sense of humor. Come talk with me more often. I'll teach you some techniques for using warp energy." Magnus laughed, and the two exchanged a knowing look. This matter could not be told to the Emperor, not yet. It was tantamount to studying orc technology, and the Emperor's intolerance for orcs and chaos was absolute. Even a Primarch who violated that truth could expect the Emperor's wrath. For the rest of the cultivators, aside from the first, the physical differences were minor, slightly green or red skin at most. Axis had once seen Imperial recruitment posters where Abhumans and mutants looked more alien than the stories made them appear. "Axis, while you're here on my planet, enjoy yourself. If you need anything, come to me," Magnus said. He planned to hide everything that had happened today, Axis's perfect gene seed evolution and Axis's help in producing new recruits. Anyone involved would have their memories erased by psychic power. Mortals would never learn the truth about Prospero, and his gene seed offspring would not leak the secret. "Mr. Magnus, for the upcoming gene seed evolutions, should I assist directly, or would you have your offspring do it?" Axis asked. If you cooperate with my child, you should be able to refine even more perfect gene seeds and increase the number of successful transformations, Magnus said. Even with his special heir, he did not intend to step aside entirely. Axis's ki wasn't as pure as Axis's, and the child's gene seed had been spawned because of Axis. Axis's continued involvement was necessary. Perfect gene seeds would eventually replace all the mutated stock. All right, I'll do more since I can, Axis shrugged. You won't work for nothing, Magnus said. I'll give you a special gift, and a gift for your space wolves. Oh, what kind of gift? Axis asked. I can help your space wolves train some special space marines with psychic talent. Psychers in the legions are invaluable. They can foresee danger, predict enemy movements, cast teleportation and offensive psychic disciplines, and help repel warp entities, Magnus said enthusiastically. Axis's mouth fell open. That sounded like the intellect library, but that plan shouldn't exist yet. In the original history, the idea of legionary psychers had been controversial. Magnus, Sanguinius, and a few others had proposed establishing intellect libraries to train psychers across legions, with the Thousand Sons leading the effort. Some Primarchs embraced the idea, while others adamantly opposed psychers within their ranks. The Iron Warriors, Space Wolves, Imperial Fists, Iron Hands, and Death Guard had been staunch opponents. The Space Wolves insisted their rune priests weren't psychers at all, claiming Fenrisian spirit and natural energy, not the warp, were the source. It was, as Magnus knew, self-deception. That natural power was in fact psychic. Russ's attitude towards psychers in the original timeline had been vehemently negative, yet paradoxically, he himself possessed psychic power. At Prospero, his psychic force had been decisive. It was a crucial factor in his confrontation with Magnus. Axis had already noticed Russ had psychic potential, albeit well hidden. Perhaps Axis's presence had awakened it early. Given that, Magnus hoped Russ would be more receptive now. I should discuss it with my father, Russ, Axis said. No problem. I'll speak to him, Magnus replied. He meant to gain Russ's support, and then approach the Emperor with several Primarchs to propose the Intellect Library, the Thousand Sons offering to train psychers for other legions. Since Russ was present and they seemed to get along, Magnus planned to start with him. They left the secret lab together. Magnus looked at his special gene seed offspring and felt a fondness. He even resembled Magnus. From today on, I give you a new name. You shall be called Gris, Magnus declared. Yes, father, I will be Gris, the child answered. I've already notified the armory. Go there and receive your power armor and arms, and join your brothers. Through psychic suggestion, Magnus had already instructed the tech priests and implanted false memories in some people on Prospero. From now on, no one would know Gris had been brought by Axis. They would believe he was born and raised on Fenris and underwent a normal gene seed transformation. After Gris left, Magnus and Axis went to Leman Russ's quarters. My brother, your wolf cub helped me much. I return him to you now. While he's here, have him as my guest on my planet, Magnus said. Axis, I'll help you if I can. Just don't take him away from me. Then everything's negotiable, Russ replied. Brother, I have a remarkable plan. I want your help, Magnus continued. What plan? The Legion Intellect Library. It's to cultivate a contingent of space marines in each legion who can wield psychic power, Magnus explained, laying out the advantages. Russ's expression darkened. Drop it. Psychic power is very dangerous. It's an evil force, he said bluntly. The reply surprised Magnus and startled Axis. Magnus tried to reason, you must see how useful psychers are to the Imperium. Yes, the power comes from the warp, but used properly, it can be controlled. Russ shook his head. My father told me psychic power is perilous. Every time I travel the warp, I feel a vast malignance there, calling to me. I will not answer that call. Parts of the Imperium may need psychers, but I will not cultivate them in my legion. Magnus was incredulous. Then is my father evil? He and I are among the most powerful psychers among humanity. No, father's psychic power is different. His is holy, golden, Russ said simply. You haven't seen father's true nature. Look closely, and you'll find he is colder and darker than we imagine. Magnus snorted coldly. As the Imperium's greatest psyker next to the Emperor, Magnus could see the Emperor's projection in the warp clearly, and it was not benign. That power was darker and more corrupting than most realized, infinitely potent and terrifying. I was only trying to help, to make an offer, Magnus said, gathering himself. If you won't accept, consider it meddling. He prepared to leave, giving Axis a meaningful look that said, hide your psychic talents. Don't let your father know. Wait, Axis blurted, stepping forward. It's better to speak openly. Misunderstandings come from silence. Father, Axis continued, voice steady, my arrangement with Magnus involved psychic power. I asked him to help me develop a special soul projection so I could access warp psychic power. No, Russ exploded. What are you saying, Axis? Psychic power is evil. Your chi is sacred. Why would you dabble in that corruption? Did Magnus seduce you? I asked for it voluntarily, Axis said. Russ stood stunned for a long 2 seconds, mouth agape, before turning on Axis with barely controlled anger. Axis, Father told me your chi can resist the warp. The warp is an evil force. Every being within it is corrupted. You are the purest among us. You could have kept humanity's purity, the very talent for resisting the warp, and yet you threw it away. Embrace that power yourself. His voice thundered with rage and disappointment. Do you even know what the warp is? Do you know what's in there? Do you know the enemies you are courting? Axis shot back, scornful. He did not accept the Imperial truth without question. The human emperor had sacrificed everything for humanity, sitting on that golden throne for 10,000 years, an agony that warped his being. He had become something neither alive nor dead, segregating and accumulating negative aspects of himself until he teetered on the edge of a dark king bursting free. Axis feared that, like Slanesh once did to the Eldar, the Emperor's accumulated corruption could one day devour humanity and ascend into a god. The threat of the warp was enormous, but Axis also believed the Emperor hid too much. The less the Emperor told his Primarchs, the easier it was for the warp to use them. Even Horus, the one the Emperor trusted most, knew only that strange entities existed in the Imperium. He did not understand their natures or differences. Axis thought he understood the warp far better than most of the Gene Seed Primarchs. The warp did not simply vanish if you ignored it. Its denizens were not abstract threats that could be wished away. The 4 Chaos Gods, Axis argued, were the apex of the Imperium's power, effectively immortal, fundamentally woven into the fabric of the warp. They could not be destroyed by conventional means. Though they were not part of the material universe, they could influence it, creating daemons, corrupting minds, twisting flesh and fate. On the battlefield of the setting where gods and powers collided, these 4 were the ceiling of combat power. Without absolute certainty that he would not be corrupted by the warp, Axis would never have accepted psychic power. But if his chi and his angelic halo could cleanse and resist the warp's taint, then accepting that power made sense. To beat an enemy, you must first understand it. If Axis limited himself to training chi and Super Saiyan strength in the material universe, he would always be vulnerable. A single spike of anger could catch the attention of Khorne. Emotional turmoil made one susceptible to corruption. What use was legendary Super Saiyan strength if he could not harness or release anger safely? Axis was no saint. He had all the human emotions that the Chaos Gods could exploit: joy, anger, sorrow, fear. Even a momentary lapse could be enough. You cannot guard against a thief forever, he thought. If his chi could not counter warp infection, he would remain cautious, maybe traveling with a null or a custodian, accepting his limits. Killing the 4 Chaos Gods outright was a fantasy without universe-shattering power. Their greatest enemies were often each other, embroiled in the eternal great game. Even the mightiest physical fighters, like a legendary Super Saiyan who could tear planets apart, would be nothing in the face of the warp unless they possessed god power. The Dragon Ball route to godhood, 5 Saiyans and a ritual to become Super Saiyan God, was impossible for someone not born of that world. Vegeta's own ascent had come through angelic aid, drawing on powers beyond the material. Whis, Beerus, godly forces. That was Axis's point. The material universe did not contain god power. The only channel to it was through the Imperium, through the warp and psychic development. The Cetan might command cosmic forces, but those were primitive compared to true god power. If Axis's psychic abilities, bolstered by his chi and the angelic halo, could resist and purify warp influence, he could learn to comprehend god power and, perhaps one day, stand a chance against those 4. Otherwise, he would be just another powerful savage facing gods. The warp's evil is overwhelming, Russ said, quieter now. Every time I touch it, I feel that utter savagery. If I didn't feel that, I'd be less determined to fight it. I've seen psychers tear holes between worlds, open gateways for warp things to pour through. I've seen them. Some use their powers to dominate ordinary people, to strike down a space marine from miles away. My brother, the warp is terrifying, Magnus said calmly, but I think Axis is right. You don't understand it at all. None of us, not fully. When I reached into the warp, I felt something calling. At first I thought it was a trick, but it wasn't. We all must have felt it, yet no one speaks of it plainly. I know only that Father protects us, preserves humanity from those demons, Russ replied. Axis answered with something more pointed. Father, I know more than you think. The Emperor meant me to understand the warp. Kasha was left by him to teach me. Axis had indeed been guided. Kasha had revealed many truths, things Axis had not even known before. He had learned that before Slaanesh's rise, the Eldar's gods had been considered part of a pantheon aligned with order, not evil. In aggregate, those Eldar powers might have balanced a single warp god. Only after the fall of the Eldar did Slaanesh annihilate them. Axis hoped that, by using his purification ability on warp-tainted energy, he might reach out and draw on those orderly divinities, the imprisoned remnants, borrowing their power. If he could fuse such god power to his own physical might, he could become an entity comparable to, or even exceeding, the human emperor. Russ, I created a soul projection to extract a controlled amount of warp energy. Axis's chi acts like a filter. It purifies. If we don't take too much, it's safe, Magnus explained. Axis was in a far safer position than typical psychers. He could filter out the chaotic, corrupting taint. He also had his powerful physical soul and the angelic halo to reinforce the work. Axis demonstrated. A golden-green psychic light unfurled from him, not the pitch-black, writhing evil of warp power, but something balanced, peaceful, and radiant. It was psychic energy shaped by Axis's chi and halo, not raw chaos. Russ felt it immediately. This was a different force entirely, something calm and cleansing rather than malevolent. For the first time since the argument began, relief washed over him. Make the right choice today, Axis, Russ warned softly. Do not be tempted by whatever lurks in that space. If you want to understand, Father, come with me to see Kasha, Axis said. Kasha is who the Emperor left with me specifically so I could learn the warp. Russ considered the offer, then nodded. If it was the Emperor's intention, he wanted to know the truth of the warp for himself. Because the Emperor had already arranged for Axis to be told this secret, Russ, being his son, felt he ought to be present as well. May I listen in? I know something about the warp, but I want to hear what another powerful psyker has to say. To be honest, a blue, bird-headed man keeps bothering me in my dreams, Magnus said from where he stood. He had been probing the warp these past years, and the blue birdman had even tried to tempt him, offering to cure the gene seed corruption of his sons in exchange for one of Magnus's eyes. Magnus had refused then. It had been one of his own eyes. Now, with Axis claiming to have produced a perfect gene seed, perhaps that shadow could be ignored. Axis nodded. The blue bird-headed figure was an easy guess, Tzeentch. His catchphrase would have been something like, "Everything is proceeding as I intend." If Tzeentch had been reaching for Magnus, then the Thousand Sons gene seed mutation almost certainly tied back to him. Wait here, Axis said, standing. I'll go fetch Kasha. Kasha had spent the last 2 days in seclusion, meditating and not leaving her room. Axis found her there. Kasha, I need your help, he said. I want you to tell Russ and Magnus everything you know about the warp. 3 question marks seemed to form above Kasha's expression. Axis, what nonsense are you talking about? The Emperor strictly forbids revealing any warp intelligence to the Primarchs, she answered. Only a very few in the Imperium really knew the truth about the warp. Officially, the Emperor, Micardo, and a handful of other immortals. The Gene Seed Primarchs had been explicitly forbidden any contact with warp lore. Telling Axis had been sanctioned by the Emperor himself. Telling anyone else was not. Knowing the horror of the warp helps one cope with it. We're not asking the Primarchs to play with the warp, only to understand its nature, Axis argued. No, I can't, Kasha said immediately. If I tell them and the Emperor finds out, He'll lock me in the dungeons again." She shook her head. Her father had kept his word before. Her mother had once been tempted into a grievous error, and Kasha had been implicated. She had paid for it with decades of imprisonment. She would not risk a repeat. "Trust me," Axis said, taking her hand with a solemn look. "Soon I'll put something before the Emperor he cannot refuse. I'll clear your name completely. I'll have him acknowledge you as Imperial Princess." Kasha's refusal hardened. "You don't understand the Primarchs at all. My mother had a theory. The gene seed Primarchs are lesser gods of the warp, born from the psychic strength of humanity itself. With our vast numbers, it was inevitable that powerful human gods would arise. For reasons I don't understand, Father took them. If those Primarchs truly awaken, they'll likely return to the warp. Father is trying desperately to keep them from anything related to the warp." Axis cocked an eyebrow. "Then we'll ask Father directly. I'll show him something new, evidence that will make him listen." "What are you talking about?" "Not now. If you contact Father and he finds out what you've been dabbling in, you'll be finished, and I'll be dragged down with you," Kasha warned. She was uneasy about Axis's two mysterious subjects, the cultivators, and the idea of telling the Emperor anything that might implicate them. "You'd better keep the cultivators secret." "I won't be using the cultivators this time," Axis promised. "We can't let your father learn of them yet." Kasha hesitated. "You at least have to tell me what this is, so I can judge whether it's useful." Axis brightened. "It's a communications function. I found it by accident. Two combat power detectors can maintain contact with one another across the distance of a planet." Kasha sighed. "Father already knows of planetary communications. Do you think the Imperium doesn't have that?" "We have long-distance methods too," she continued. "We can communicate across systems, even several light years, though speed is constrained. Transmission still relies on warp channels to cover vast distances. That's why psychic communications exist." Axis's eyes gleamed. "But what if it's real-time communication across hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of light years?" Kasha stared. "What are you saying? Your combat power detector does not have that capability. It only needs powerful relay stations. With a sufficient network of signal bases, combat power detectors can form a continuous link across arbitrary distances. Do you see what that means? Humanity could free itself from reliance on psychic warp communication," Axis said. "The Emperor had always wanted to release mankind from the warp's grip. Even if the Webway project and hyperspace drive succeeded, transstellar communications still depended on the warp. A system like the one Axis hinted at might allow real space communication without the warp at all." "You're serious?" Kasha asked. "Do you have blueprints for those base stations?" "Of course not," Axis admitted. "But through reverse engineering, human tech should be able to work it out." Kasha was cautious. "I can tell Father about this, but the warp remains a very dangerous thing. Don't overestimate the Adeptus Mechanicus. They have their limitations. It's not as risky as you think. We can play this smart. First, tell Father the good news, that another Primarch has been found and rescued, and that I helped. That will put him in a good mood. Then we'll present the communications discovery as a gift." Axis's persuasive smile carried the practiced politeness of someone who knew how to shape stories. Kasha's eyes lit up. She sat cross-legged and reached out with her mind into the warp, establishing psychic contact with the Emperor. News had already brightened him. Sanguinius had been found and the second Primarch rescued, and he was in a favorable temper. "Father, do you require a report?" Kasha asked into the psychic channel. "Yes," came the Emperor's measured voice. "Kasha, what have you to tell me?" "Emperor, Father," she corrected under Axis's influence. "Axis has discovered another function of the combat power detector. With enough signal base stations, real space communication without warp channels may be possible." The Emperor listened. "I always thought the combat power detector's range was planetary. If it truly can be scaled, that is an unexpected and valuable discovery. You have done well. Do you seek reward?" "Serving the Imperium and serving you is reward enough," Kasha said, careful to keep her language modest as Axis had coached. "I will remember this contribution," the Emperor said. "Micardo will begin research immediately. The signal base station you describe could be of critical importance to humanity." Axis had read the mood correctly. The Emperor was pleased. Now came the crucial piece. Kasha and Axis are guests on Magnus's sorcerer planet, she reported. Axis aided Magnus in resolving the gene seed mutation. Good, the Emperor replied. Magnus also confided something during a banquet. A blue, feathered, bird-headed man has been troubling him in the warp. Magnus believes that his gene seed corruption is connected to that entity. There was a pause. Then the Emperor's voice flared like thunder. What? A blue-feathered, bird-headed thing? Tsinch! He roared. 87. Fool the Emperor. Voice skills, Huang Laohan. The Emperor flared with fury so intense that Kasha could feel it even across thousands of light years. She opened her eyes, gave Axis a small nod, and let a faint smile tug at the corner of her mouth, exactly the expression Axis had been counting on. Axis returned a thumbs up, signaling it was time to play their part. I explicitly warned him not to poke around the secrets of the warp. Why didn't he listen? Tell me everything, in full, the Emperor demanded. Father, Russ and Axis went to Prospero as guests, and Magnus received us graciously. He had problems with his gene seed, some sort of flesh mutation, and I think you already know about this, Kasha relayed, following Axis's cues in the conversation. I am aware of his legion's condition. I have been looking for solutions, but now is not the time, the Emperor said. Because many of the gene seed Primarchs originated in the warp, some even breathed with the nature of lesser warp gods, their link to the warp could not be entirely severed. From the moment he had created them, the Emperor had known that betrayal was possible. Corruption was inevitable. The Primarch's gene seeds all carried flaws. He had planned to carry out the Great Crusade while gradually addressing those defects. Axis's chi has exceptional resistance to the warp, Kasha continued. He used his chi to help evolve Magnus's gene seed. When the evolution finished, the gene seed took on a perfect spherical form, a flawless ball of flesh. That is how gene seeds should be, untainted by any warp influence. Continue. What happened next, especially about that blue-feathered bird-headed thing, the Emperor asked. He had underestimated Axis's chi. If Axis could purify gene seed to a pristine state, the risk of warp infection might be avoidable. After Axis corrected the gene seed, surgical modifications for new recruits succeeded far more often, Kasha said. Magnus was pleased and invited Axis to stay with the Legion to help rectify more gene seed issues. Russ and Axis agreed to remain for a month and a half to help Magnus produce a batch of stable gene seed. There was a complication. Magnus proposed an intellect library plan to cultivate a number of psyker-capable Astartes within each legion. Axis supported it, but Russ objected. They argued, and in the heat of it, Magnus revealed that a blue-feathered, bird-headed warp entity had once promised to fix his gene seed on the condition that Magnus give up one of his eyes. Magnus refused and told me to report the matter to you. He did not go seeking that thing. It came to him in dreams. Well done. This should have been reported immediately, the Emperor said, approval in his voice. He had forbidden the Primarchs from investigating the warp because he feared the Chaos God's attentions. One Primarch had already been targeted. Had he not known, the consequences could have been disastrous. The warp entities loved to scheme, especially the Blue Birdman. Fortunately, Kasha had told him in time. Tell Magnus to contact me at once, the Emperor ordered. I will use my psychic power to help him resist this intrusion. Tell him never to trust any words from those warp evils. Dismiss them as lies. Yes, Father, I will tell Magnus. Good. Since the problem was discovered early, the danger is limited. When you can, have Axis baptize Magnus with his chi, the Emperor added. If Axis's chi could restore corrupted gene seed, then exposing Magnus to it should reduce the warp's influence on him. I understand. Anything else to report, Kasha? He asked. There is one more thing, Kasha said. Russ already knows about the Blue Birdman, and he has felt something else. He said that whenever he travels through the warp, he hears a strange call, an ugly, barbaric summoning. Silence stretched across the psychic link. 10 minutes later, the Emperor spoke again. Did you tell Axis about the horrors of the warp? Kasha answered that she had. She and Axis had described the warp's dangers and the 4 malign entities that dwell there. During their last voyage, they had even fought Khorne and Slaanesh daemons together. Since Russ knows and Axis knows, you may tell Russ some truths about the warp, the Emperor said. Make clear that no warp entity can be trusted. They are all malign. Kasha promised to relay his warning. I must return to Holy Terra. I need to meet with the second Primarch and oversee the rebuilding of the Second Legion, the Emperor said, preparing to end the communication. Father, Axis and I have a conjecture, Kasha blurted. Magnus and Leman Russ both sense that call in the warp. Do the other Gene Seed Primarchs feel it too? Or are they hiding it from you? Again, the Emperor was silent. If other Primarchs felt the same pull, the problem was grave. Kasha urged him to ask the others directly and not let the matter fester, arguing that forbidding knowledge outright might make the Primarchs more curious and more vulnerable. I understand, the Emperor replied at last, but offered no commitment. Then he cut the connection. Kasha relayed the outcome to Axis. Father agreed to let me tell Magnus and Russ about chaos in the warp, but he didn't say whether to inform the other Primarchs or to ask them if they sensed the call. It'll take time, Axis said. I've more or less figured out your father. He's reserved. He doesn't communicate well. Axis reflected on how the Emperor's reticence could breed misunderstanding. The Primarchs might not grasp that he tried to protect them. Misunderstanding, once rooted, could never be fully undone. One reason Axis had insisted on their small deception. Axis, what do we do now? Kasha asked. First, tell Russ and Magnus, what they need to know, Axis said, grinning despite himself. They left the room together. As they entered Russ's chamber, Magnus called out, making Axis freeze. You're back, Tailboy? Magnus's psychic awareness was formidable. He had heard Axis's joke in the next room. Axis coughed. A joke. Now for the serious part. The Emperor has agreed that Kasha may tell you about the warp. Afterwards, the Emperor wants a private meeting with Magnus and will provide him psychic protection against that blue-feathered thing. Kasha took a breath and told them everything. The 4 chaos gods and their spheres. War and blood. Excess and excess's pleasure. Change and deceit. Decay and pestilence. The hierarchy of demonic beings, from greater daemons down to chaos lords, champions, chosen, and daemon princes. She explained warp corruption and the protection the Gellar field offered. Above all, she warned, never trust the words of chaos. So that Birdman is a greater daemon, or an extension of a chaos god, Magnus said, stunned. Yes, Father will use his power to shield you, but you should also build a strong Gellar field in your quarters, Kasha said. Magnus nodded. Russ sat in silence. The truth settled over him like ice. Gods existed, and worse, there were 4 of them, born of humanity's darkest drives. The imperial truth, his father's edict that there were no gods, suddenly looked fragile and necessary at once. If people realized these gods existed, they would inevitably worship them. Mortals had a tendency to seek out gods. Russ understood the terrible logic behind his father's lie. Suppress belief to prevent the spread of worship that would only invite ruin. Then I have one last crucial question. Why do we Gene Seed Primarchs feel a strange familiarity and an inexplicable call when we travel through the warp? Russ asked. It was the question that mattered most to him. Magnus opened his mouth, then fell silent. I'm sorry, Lord Russ, Kasha answered. The Emperor has limited what I may reveal. Information about you Gene Seed Primarchs is classified at the highest level in the Imperium. Even I do not know the full particulars. Why were the Primarchs drawn to the warp? Why the sense of recognition, the calling? Kasha did not know. Perhaps her mother knew, perhaps her father did, but those truths were buried. Russ opened his mouth to press further, but Magnus placed a hand on his shoulder, shook his head, and said quietly, We know enough, Russ. Don't push it. Kasha doesn't know the specifics, and Axis doesn't either. We must trust Father. He forbids us to probe the warp because it is dangerous. Even I, the most powerful psyker among you, would be hunted by the malign things in the warp. Russ nodded. He had learned enough today to be satisfied. Those 4 entities in the warp are monsters, Axis added. No matter what they say, we shouldn't trust them. He spoke with the bluntness of a warrior who'd seen counsel and cunning masquerade as truth. The Chaos Gods did not always lie in the literal sense, but neither were they honest. They could show a possible future, manipulate meaning, and use what they revealed to ensnare mortals. They had shown Horus a vision of the future, 10,000 years hence, of an Imperium corroded and the Golden Throne claiming the Emperor. That vision was part of the lure that led to rebellion. It did not say that Horus himself would bring about that future. I know, Axis, Russ said, rolling his eyes. You don't need to worry about me. Magnus changed the subject. Russ, brother, do you still oppose my Legion Intellect Library plan? He asked. The partial truths they'd gained about the warp today owed largely to the Librarius on Prospero. Magnus wanted to know whether Leman Russ would support extending the model. I agree, Magnus, Russ replied. The Space Wolves will have our own intellect library. It will be an honor to accept your help. Relief softened Russ's features. With that settled, Magnus smiled broadly. I knew you would agree. The Legion Librarius must be cultivated from youth. Prospero has many young psychers, some of the finest. They would have been my recruits, but I will give you a selection of the most talented. Implant them with your gene seed. Let them become your gene seed offspring. Once their modifications are complete, they will train on Prospero until I certify them. Then I will send them to you. So tomorrow I'll bring some Space Wolves gene seed to you, Russ said. He planned to have Axis use his chi to purify the samples. Perfect gene seed might resist the Wolfen curse. Only if the implants were stable would he be comfortable leaving recruits on Prospero. I must take my leave, brother, Magnus said. I have other matters to discuss with Father. After the meeting, Magnus withdrew alone to meditate and to reach the Emperor through the warp. The Emperor quickly reassured him and instructed him to erect a powerful Jeller field at his residence on Prospero and to remain ever vigilant. Do not worry, Father, Magnus told him. I will be watchful. I will not trust the words of the Chaos Gods. That reassures me, my son, the Emperor replied. You are the strongest psyker among the gene seed Primarchs, second only to me in all humanity. Macardo is far behind you. When we join our powers, none can rival us in the warp. No one can sever the connection between us, father and son. When the Great Crusade is complete, I will choose an heir among the Primarchs. There are things I cannot tell you yet, but when the crusade truly ends and my design is fulfilled, you and I will travel the warp together. The promise hit Magnus like the first light after a long night. To explore the warp side by side with his father, one day to peer into its riddles with the architect of humanity, was intoxicating. Some interpreted the Emperor's words as meaning that Magnus would one day occupy the Golden Throne. Whatever the truth, the promise bound Magnus to his father with renewed devotion. Prepare well for the Great Crusade, my son, the Emperor added. Raise more legionaries. For all humanity, we must complete the crusade. Magnus bowed inwardly, thrilled and driven. On the other side of the sphere of influence, Russ and Axis returned to the flagship Glory Queen in a boarding craft. Russ summoned his Legion apothecaries, had them retrieve a cache of Space Wolves gene seed, and brought Axis into a sealed vault. Axis, Russ said, you purified Magnus's gene seed and removed the warp influence. Can you do the same for mine? You know our 6th Legion. This Wolfen curse has plagued my brothers for as long as I can remember. If there's any way to shield our gene seed from it, I want it done. Axis nodded. Father, I can use Chi to help you evolve the gene seed. He knew the problem was not identical to Magnus's case. Tzeentch's corruption had warped Magnus's seed. The Wolfen affliction had deeper genetic roots in the canine chimera that the Emperor had blended into Russ's lineage. Chi could not rewrite destiny, but it could stabilize and reduce the chance of outbreak. Perfected gene seed would be more stable and safer for recruits. The apothecaries brought out a large sealed barrel of culture caskets, each vial of gene seed suspended in nutrient fluid and stasis fields. The gene seed were the Legion's most precious stores, harvested from veterans during campaigns and kept for future recruitment. Axis placed both hands on the vessels and poured chi into them, focusing like a surgeon. Under his influence, the malformed buds and protrusions on many of the samples smoothed and receded. Flesh rounded into perfect spheres, the gene seed returned to the original form the Emperor had intended. Russ watched, elation breaking across his face. This was the pure, original pattern. Excellent work, Axis, he said, laughing. When the next transport of recruits arrives, they will take these back. From now on, all new initiates will be seated with these. Axis smiled. Father, when Magnus and I were in the laboratory, we used gene seed to cultivate a special Astartes cultivator. Do you want one as well? The Astartes cultivator was a formidable construct. Physically stronger than a common duelist, gifted with psychic ability and a markedly longer lifespan than ordinary cultivators. It was a dangerous and powerful asset, and Russ considered the offer with the zeal of a lord preparing his pack for the campaigns to come. Chapter 89, Leaving Prospero. The Great Crusade Axis had decided to grow another Astartes-grade cultivator for Leman Russ. The first specimen had been the original, but it had lived only about 10 years. The second had been grown with Russ's blood, tainted by the Primarch's own vitae. Axis estimated that one would live for several hundred, perhaps 1,000 years. The third Astartes version, they believed, would also live for at least a millennium. "One do is enough," Russ finally said. "I'll send him back to Fenris on this transport with the new recruits to undergo the Astartes modification surgeries there." Astartes-grade cultivators could be produced in different ways. Axis and Magnus had used their particular methods. Another route was surgical implantation of gene seed, completing the full 19 procedures. Magnus had revealed his cultivator openly, and the Thousand Sons took no offense. In fact, because of its red skin, the Legion felt it was more like a child of their father. Duo's slightly green hue had been a minor concern, but the special gene seed used to make these things was so rare, Axis did not want to waste it. "It's only a cultivator," Axis said. "Your son can spare one. Let Duo return to Fenris and strengthen the warriors there with his chi. The newly cultivated Astartes will stay with us." Russ did not press the matter further, and on the Space Wolves ship they produced another cultivator. This one had normal-toned skin with green pupils, stood 2.3 meters tall, and in physique surpassed the red cultivator Magnus had produced, a clear inheritance of Russ's superior genes. Leman Russ, Vulcan, and Angron ranked among the strongest gene seed lines. This new individual carried that legacy. "Let's give you a name," Axis said after a moment. "From today you shall be Thor." A Nordic name suited him. When combat power reached a certain level, the chi from the Dragon Ball world could even draw lightning, an amusing thought that made the name fit. This new cultivator Thor would be far stronger than Do-O and a great asset. "Yes, master and father. From today my name is Thor," the new cultivator said, bowing to Axis and then looking at Russ. Russ stepped forward and patted the gene seed offspring. "From this day you will follow me and serve as my wolf guard, charged with my personal protection." "Yes, father, it is my honor," Thor answered. For the next 6 weeks, Magnus taught Kasha much of Prospero's psychic lore. Axis had been the natural pupil, but his mastery of the warp was still too limited to warrant Magnus's direct attention, and Axis had been occupied evolving perfect gene seeds for Magnus and the Wolf Guard. He returned late each night to continue his work and had no spare time, so Magnus put Kasha under his wing. One day, Kasha would return to teach Axis the warp arts he'd learned. A little over a month later, a Fenrisian transport arrived at Prospero, bearing 1,000 Space Wolves recruits in fresh Great Crusade Mk2 plate, bolters and chainswords slung at their sides. They were to be distributed among the companies. Axis's contingent received 300. Their arrival meant the time had come. Axis and Russ would soon leave Prospero and join the Great Crusade. The new recruits stood at attention before Axis, gene-modified and ready for inspection. Axis mounted the dice and addressed them in a booming voice. "Warriors of Fenris, recruits of the Space Wolves, I am your Wolf Lord Axis. Welcome to my pack. This pack has just been formed. You will follow 100 veterans and me into the Great Crusade, for the Imperium of Man, for the Wolf King." "For the Imperium, for the Wolf King," the 300 banged their armor and shouted. "Good. Now return to the ship and find your quarters. From now on, 4 of you will form a combat team, 1 veteran leading 3 recruits. Learn from your elders." Axis organized his pack into 100 4-man teams so they could support one another on the field and operate independently when needed. New men would be apprenticed to veterans. Incoming waves of recruits would train the same way. He then turned the men over to his veterans to pass on the lore of the Wolf Guard. That night, they held a great welcoming feast. For the first time, Axis sat in the Wolf Lord's seat aboard his ship as his new pack celebrated around him. "To Wolf Lord Axis," the pack called, raising their cups. "Drink." Axis laughed, lifting his own. "From this night on, we are one community, one unbreakable pack." They reveled until dawn. The mortals aboard the ship were kept busy tending to their masters. Early the next morning, Axis boarded Russ's battleship, the Glory Queen. Duo would be undergoing the Astartes modification surgeries there, intent on strengthening Fenrisian warriors and future recruits with his key and purifying gene seed until it reached perfection. Thor would accompany Russ, taking over Duo's duties. "Father, Master, be well." Duo bowed to Axis and Russ before stepping onto the transport. "Goodbye, brother," Thor called, waving. Once the transport had gone, Russ and Axis returned to Prospero to take their leave of Magnus. The mission to Prospero had been a resounding success. Magnus waited for them in his palace. Kasha stood at his side, a clear product of the months of tutelage. Though older than Magnus in years, Kasha's psychic attainment was, to be blunt, dwarfed by Magnus's mastery. "Time passes fast," Magnus observed. "In the blink of an eye, you are ready to leave." Russ's visit had brought unimaginable benefits. All the unfit gene seed in the Legion had been culled. What remained were perfect strains. In 6 weeks, they'd modified over 1,000 recruits, many already fitted with second hearts. By the time these troops reached the Great Crusade, their surgeries would be complete, and they would be capable of producing clean, perfect gene seed. Magnus's gene seed offspring would continue to evolve the stock. "Take care, brother. I look forward to meeting you on the field of the Great Crusade," said, stepping forward to embrace Magnus. "You as well. I will train your Legion's intellect library diligently. By my estimate, in about 20 years, they will be ready to serve your Legion," Magnus replied. "I look forward to their joining my ranks," Russ said. "Lord Magnus, farewell for now. I hope that when next we meet, your 1,000 sons are free of that warp taint," Axis added. "I believe it is possible," Magnus answered. With their farewells complete, Axis took Kasha and, together with Russ, returned to the Space Wolves' fleet. The Great Crusade had begun. The fleet tore through the veil of reality into the warp, following the route laid down by Imperial command. "Father, who are we up against this time?" Axis asked, eager. "Orders from the Imperial Military Department," Russ said. "We head to an uncharted star sector. A human world there is under attack by orcs. We are to liberate it and exterminate the greenskins." "Orcs?" Axis sneered with amusement. "I request the honor of going in alone." "They are a merry breed," Axis added with a smile. He relished the thought of testing his pack against such savage foes. Russ laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "Ha! Then I'll have your brothers clear the way for you," he said. 90. The brutal nature of the Saiyans, killing the green-skinned orcs. After a stretch of warp travel, the fleet of Russ and Axis arrived in an unfamiliar star system. It resembled the Sol system. One yellow dwarf at the center, 5 gas giants, and 4 smaller, rocky worlds about the size of Mars. Those inner terrestrial planets, however, were too close to their sun and far too hot to be made habitable. Beyond a behemoth gas giant lay a world in the habitable zone, a little smaller than Earth. Humans had discovered and colonized it long ago, but after the warp storm erupted across the galaxy, the colony went dark. When the Imperium rediscovered the planet, humanity there had been almost wiped out. The planet had become an orc world, every surface crawling with green-skinned brutes. With no effective enemies left, the orcs had turned their violence inward. Endless skirmishes, births and deaths, and the constant rise of bigger, meaner war bosses. Fortunately, their civilization had stalled. Lacking enough stimulation, they had not developed spaceflight beyond crude weapons and ramshackle war engines. They remained confined to their planet. The high-definition tactical projection aboard the flagship painted the world in chaotic, horrific detail. Wah! 1,000 ragged war cries rose from the surface. Orcs brandished shattered metal and rusty guns, brawling in endless heaps. The Imperium found this world years ago, an officer of the Imperial Mortal Auxiliary observed. Normally, a single planet like this could be cleared by an Imperial army force with naval support. But orcs are different. If you fight them with full lethal mortal forces, you risk stimulating them into faster evolution. With species like this, you either cleanse them utterly at once or engage them only at close quarters. They had spent years assembling mortal legions, waiting for a gene seed Primarch to arrive and lead the extermination. If the orcs could not be completely wiped out, the only recourse would be exterminatus, destroy the planet and render it useless. Primarch, the 721st is in position. Millions stand ready. What are your orders? An Imperial general asked. Russ glanced at the planet, then at Axis. I think those inner worlds, fitted with stellar thrusters, could be nudged into the habitable zone and terraformed. Russ said offhandedly. Axis nodded. There are moons around the giants. They can be turned into mining worlds or small fortress worlds. Now is not the time to plan post-war colonization, an Imperial Navy officer said. We have to take this planet. Our estimates put orc numbers in the hundreds of millions. Don't worry about numbers, Russ waved the concern away. After today, there won't be any orcs left. With Axis involved, the orcs stood no real chance. Their ground forces were essentially scouting elements. The battle would be short. How they handled the rest of the system mattered far more. We should bring settlers from other Imperial worlds. This place could be rebuilt into a hive world, Axis added. The mortal commanders exchanged incredulous looks. They could not follow why a Primarch would already be talking about taxes and colonies while the planet still throbbed with orc cries. Ha ha! This world will be claimed by the space wolves. We'll get our share of taxes, Russ said, amused. There are moons we can convert into agricultural worlds, Axis continued. 2 would make the system largely self-sufficient. Good thinking. How long will it take you to secure the planet? Russ asked. A few hours, Axis said, stroking his chin. If he wanted to obliterate the world, 1 minute would do, but Axis had never had the chance in this universe to raise a planet theatrically. He meant to keep the planet intact. Mortal officers were uncomfortably excited and also perturbed. Conquering a planet overtaken by hundreds of millions of orcs in a matter of hours sounded impossible to them. Send a psyker transmission to the Departamento Munitorum. Tell them to prepare at least 2 billion Hive World settlers and begin immediate transfer. Notify the Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars to start system-wide infrastructure reconfiguration, Russ ordered, waving his hand. The mortal commanders scrambled, but one of them protested. Primarch, please, this is a serious operation. If we exterminate the planet, it takes a day or two, but we wouldn't need so many troops. Our mission is to secure the planet intact. I do not intend to use exterminatus, Axis said. Order all mortal landing forces to touch down in 12 hours. Their mission will be cleanup, burn orc fungi and corpses with flamers, monitor the area. I don't want orc spores suddenly regrowing after we've taken the field. Execute the order, Russ agreed. The Primarch's command was absolute. The mortal commanders could do nothing but prepare their cleanup forces. Axis and Russ strode to a drop pod. Keep your fire low when you go in. Don't damage the planet more than you must, Russ said. Don't worry, just enjoy the show, Axis replied, grinning and pointing at himself. Axis stepped into the pod. After a violent descent, the pod slammed into the orc world, punching a smoking crater into the ground. When the dust swallowed by the impact cleared, Axis's figure rose from the smoke like a specter. Whack! An orc nearby roared and lifted an iron bar. A mob of boys gathered, curious and greedy. This new thing looked like a shrimp in an iron can. Shrimp! Canned shrimp! One croaked. Doesn't smell like shrimp, another sniffed. Who cares? Smash it, the mob replied. Led by a war boss, the orcs charged. Axis snorted, raised a hand, and fired a key blast. A white flare exploded, vaporizing the war boss and dozens of boys. With a sweep of his palm, he sent a crescent-shaped shockwave that shredded thousands more. Orcs leave behind spores when they die. Unless you utterly destroyed the bodies, those spores could reseed the ground. Axis used ki to reduce the corpses to vapor and ash, leaving nothing for regeneration. The orcs were not weak. Their physiology outmatched ordinary humans, and the largest could challenge an Astartes. Axis, however, delighted in savagery. He fought without finesse, piling strength and speed into every blow. He kicked heads off, punched skulls into paste, slammed 2 orcs into each other until both exploded into gore. He laughed as blood and green ichor sprayed with each strike. Too weak! Too weak! Axis taunted, picking up a war boss and smashing him into the ground hard enough to crack the earth. The shockwave sent dozens of boys flying. From the hills beyond, a deeper roar answered. A massive war boss over 4 meters tall in crude metal plating, wearing a power claw in one hand. Big shrimp! I'm going to tear you apart! It bellowed, charging with a power claw raised. Axis smiled cruelly, grabbed the arm, and swung the warboss into the ground in a brutal grinding motion. Boom, boom, boom. The ground quivered, and when Axis finally stopped, only a crushed arm remained. The rest of the warboss had been pulverized into a green smear. Axis's palm flashed white and incinerated the viscera into nothing. No spores, no tissue, nothing to regrow. The field around him had become a slaughterhouse of shattered limbs and broken bodies. Yet on the distant ridgelines, new waves of orcs surged forward like breakers, spurred into frenzy. Wah! Kill the shrimp! He smashed our boss! Axis cracked his neck, his eyes glowing crimson as ki began to boil around him. He raised his hands slowly, fingers splayed. Since you're all so eager to die, then let's all go together. Big bang attack! A concentrated burst of violence erupted from his palm, a concussive sphere that swept the battlefield. The orcs didn't have time to scream. The heat and force vaporized them. The shockwave cleaved tens of kilometers of terrain. The ground split and new lava flows boiled up. When the smoke settled, the area had been transformed into a molten wasteland. No intact corpses, only churning magma. Instead of dispersing, the planet's orcs only grew more excited. Like some wild rallying cry, orcs from every direction turned their attention on Axis. On the horizon, a massive orc host advanced. War buggies, killicans clanking, and cobbled-together gargants lurching into view. "Oh, now this is fun," Axis grinned, teeth stark white. Atop a towering battle fortress, a warboss roared, hefting a huge power axe. "Shrimp, I'm gonna grind you to dust!" Axis tilted his head, beckoned with a single finger, and the warboss replied with a thunderous charge. The ground shook, artillery boomed, and an avalanche of bullets and rockets screamed in. Axis didn't bother to dodge. The rounds clanged off his armor like frozen rain. In an instant, he was aboard the warboss's cockpit, hands around the beast's neck. "Is that all?" Axis sneered. He tightened his grip. Bone and sinew crunched. The warboss's head went slack. His neck was crushed. Axis tore the head free with brutal force, spine and all, then flicked the body aside like refuse. The corpse flew through the air and struck a distant orc titan gargant, detonating and utterly destroying the junk titan. At that moment, Axis showed the full, terrible aspect of a legendary Super Saiyan. Relentless, ecstatic violence coupled with cold, surgical efficiency. "Ha-ha! Ha-ha!" Axis laughed, the Saiyan blood inside him fully unleashed. He charged into the press of orcs like a living hurricane, leaving a trail of severed limbs and shredded bodies. A graze was fatal. A touch meant death. Golden ki flared from him, his black hair beginning to shift as energy bled into the air, and the pressure he radiated made the nearest orcs burst apart like fragile things. He rose, slowly at first, then higher until he hovered over the battlefield. Condensing a massive orb of energy between his hands, he hurled it into the thickest cluster of orcs. A blinding white light swallowed the ground. When it faded, a scorched crater extended for tens of kilometers, and there was nothing left of the horde. Even the most battle-crazed orcs stared in terrified disbelief. "He's no runt," one of them muttered. "Not a shrimp. He's stronger than any boss." Some orcs tried to flee, but there was nowhere to run. Axis unleashed a roar that shook the planet. Ki surged outward like a second atmosphere. The Terminator power armor he wore began to groan under the strain until, with a metallic scream, the plating shattered and rained down in shredded fragments. Beneath it he stood in a simple battle suit, his muscles swelling, 2.1 meters of a powerful man stretched into a 2.3-meter colossus in an instant. His eyes had turned white, and a cold, inhuman hunger radiated from him. "Ah! Ah!" He continued to pump out ki. Silver explosions repeatedly detonated across the surface, pulverizing terrain and turning vast regions into molten wastelands. Even sailors and officers on Imperial Navy and Army ships watched in stunned silence. Could a single human truly wreak this kind of devastation? The planet shuddered. The sky and ground seemed to change hue. Energy eruptions from Axis's body struck indiscriminately at every orc left alive. Reporting, intense energy fluctuations detected on the planet. The entire planet is trembling, a radar technician stammered. If the outpouring continued, the calculations suggested, the planet itself could be torn apart. "That kid Axis, how much power does he have?" Russ exclaimed from the ship, staring at the virtual display. Where Axis powered up, the surface had become a river of lava and stone. The orcs were gone in the wake of his fury. One man alone had become an extermination fleet. Axis gathered a green sphere of ki in his palm and casually flung it across the globe. It detonated in a violent blast, a mushroom cloud towering into the sky as a whole continent was scorched. The orcs on that land never even saw him. Ha! This is the true power of the legendary Super Saiyan, Axis shouted, feeling energy well up like a bottomless font. Every cell in his body screamed with power, and a terrifying anger gnawed at him, as if some inner chain strained to break. He had not fully lost himself. He held his mind with an iron grip of psychic power. For now, he could contain the rage. This form was what he called Super Saiyan mimicry. It let him call forth much of the legendary Super Saiyan's destructive force while keeping his consciousness intact. In this state, his personality was harsher and his force multiplied, but he would not tumble into uncontrollable madness. If he surrendered to that fury entirely, he could shift into the legendary Super Saiyan, what others sometimes called the transcended Super Saiyan, a transformation that made him a walking apocalypse. Kasha, are you still sane? Kasha's psychic power cut through the static between ship and surface, linking to him from below. She had never seen Axis like this before. Once, he had wiped out tens of thousands of Astartes. She had heard about it, but now she had witnessed his raw ki firsthand. Each strike from him hit with the force of a lance battery. Casual blows were like a macro cannon. Even Warlord-class and Emperor-class Titans and their general cannons would be toyed with by this level of destruction. I'm fine, Kasha. Thanks, Axis answered. He was using his enhanced brain and special core, along with his psychic discipline, to hold back the berserker within. The Emperor's modifications had been thorough. Axis wasn't a natural-born Saiyan, but his body had been perfected. The life furnace inside him let him fight for months without tiring. The super heart could withstand unimaginable pressure. His bones and muscles were reinforced. The body's potential seemed limitless. You had me worried you'd lost it completely, Kasha breathed with relief. Is this what you meant by legendary Super Saiyan? No, Axis said. This is Super Saiyan mimicry. The legendary form is an inherent ability I can use, and it makes me monstrously powerful. Muscles swell, defenses soar, stamina skyrockets, but it strips you of everything except the urge to destroy. The ki keeps climbing and you go berserk until you drop dead from exhaustion. I won't use that lightly. He went on to explain his plan. First, master the regular Super Saiyan. It wasn't as devastating as the legendary form, but it preserved the mind and control. The regular Super Saiyan multiplied combat power, only about 50 times according to his estimate, but it was a power he could earn and regulate. He compared it to a scene from a movie Kasha knew. In Super Warrior Can't Sleep, Broly, in his non-legendary Super Saiyan state, had pure gold hair. That form trained rage without surrendering the will. That was the kind of power Axis wanted to reach first. Only truly cosmic threats, perhaps the fragments of consciousness held by the space Necrons or their true cosmic star god forms, would justify going full legendary. Kasha, do me a favor, Axis said. What is it? Tell Russ and the others to prepare to deploy the mortal forces to occupy the planet. The mission's complete. Axis' uncontrolled ki had already annihilated most of the orcs. Any remnants could be mopped up by ground troops. I understand, Kasha replied. As they broke the link, Axis let the surge of energy fall away. His hair darkened back to black, his height shrank to 2.1 meters, and the last of the golden-green aura dissipated. He looked down at the ruined Terminator armor scattered around him and smiled wryly. He finally appreciated what a real battlesuit could do. The Great Crusade had a simple rule: serve the Imperium or be crushed by it. After Axis finished his devastation of the Orc horde, scores of Imperial drop pods fell from orbit and Imperial infantry poured onto the surface. What met them was apocalyptic, an entire world swept as if by a divine scouring. Terrain and environment alike had been rearranged. Only fragments of the original landscape remained. The soldiers moved through the ruin in stunned silence, clearing what needed clearing. Given the thoroughness of the destruction, they reasoned, orc spores would not be able to take root and sprout the fungi that so often followed their battles. This is an ending fit for the Emperor, an officer muttered, unable to hide his bewilderment. Only the Navy's bridge command had watched Axis's work unfold in full. The ordinary troops had been sealed in their ships and had not felt the upheaval beneath them. Exterminatus? One grunt whispered. At this early stage, the name Astra Militarum did not yet exist. The Imperial army had not yet been reorganized, and the men spoke in the old terms. A purge like Exterminatus made sense to them by implication. Total, planet-stripping destruction. No, another interrupted. We were all in the ships. There were no tremors. If Exterminatus had been used, the planet would have been vaporized by cyclonic torpedoes. We wouldn't be standing here to sweep up the wreckage. Exterminatus was not a simple thing. It required rites and ordnance that would leave a world a blasted husk. This had been different. Every surface pocked as if by artillery from impossibly close range. Macro-cannon bombardment then, a third offered. But not from us. Our ships couldn't have made this everywhere. At best, we could have surrounded half a globe. Their speculations trailed off when a squad leader snapped the men to attention. Don't pry into weapons you can't use. Clean the ground. If it's green, kill it, no questions. The troops fell silent and set about their duty. The Imperium did not need foot soldiers to theorize, it needed them to obey. Axis returned to the fleet aboard a Thunderhawk. In the hangar, the senior officers, the mortal commanders, watched him with a mixture of fear and reverence. They had seen a man eradicate hundreds of millions of orcs, one being doing the work that might have taken an army months. A single figure had leveled a world's resistance in hours. Who stood before them? Among them drove an instinctive respect. Even hardened Navy men cleared a path. This was the kind of power that commanded deference. "Ha ha ha! Magnificent," Leman Russ said, grinning openly as he approached. "Axis, I never imagined you had such strength. That was a single-handed planet-busting fight." Axis smiled, but he shrugged the praise off. Russ's admiration was genuine. The little ward he had found 25 years earlier had grown into something terrifying and useful. During the Great Crusade, the Imperium hungered for strategic and campaign-level forces like him. "You flatter me," Axis replied. "I speak truth," Russ answered. "We've finished our mission ahead of schedule." "It would have taken months if we'd gone the normal way," Russ agreed. "What now? Rest here, or push on with the crusade?" "We press the offensive," Axis said. "We'll leave a garrison and move on. If no orc mushrooms appear after a few months, the planet will be declared safe, and the Mars Mechanicum will begin terraforming." The Great Crusade ran on division of labor. The legions moved forward to reclaim worlds. Other arms finished consolidation and reconstruction. Russ explained it plainly. "We'll hold here a little, leave troops and an administrative slate, then move on. Most worlds accept the Imperium when they see our fleet. Those that don't, we remove their rulers. The people don't care who commands them. They want peace." Axis had wished for more clashes after the orc slaughter. He enjoyed the exercise. But this next world surrendered quickly. The system had been out of contact for years, isolated rather than occupied by Xenos, and its ruling council collapsed at the sight of a war fleet. Russ sent envoys. The planet accepted Imperial rule, agreed to pay the tithe, and become a hive world under Imperial administration. A few ships stayed as a deterrent. Officials and tech priests were dispatched to begin modernization. "I thought this world might put up a show," Axis said ruefully. "My wolf warriors would have liked the fight." "You'll get fights," Russ said. "But learn this, most human colonies capitulate when the fleet arrives. When they resist, we make an example. Nobles die first, often with their whole houses. If resistance is obstinate, the Emperor's justice can be vast and terrible. We spare no seeds of rebellion. The Imperium can send colonists to repopulate if needed." There were rare exceptions and savage sieges, but those were the edges of the war, not the rule. Mostly, the crusade took worlds back quietly, incorporated them into a growing machine of governance and tribute. Axis trained on the voyage. Though the Emperor had bolstered his body to far beyond mortal limits, he still pushed himself. The Mechanicum aboard fashioned a gravity chamber where he could grind his muscles, practice chi disciplines, and hone uncanny abilities. Kasha taught him to shape psychic power. Every day he practiced. Every day he grew stronger. Over the following months and years, the Space Wolves and their attached forces reclaimed world after world. Sometimes they met strange Xenos, demi-human mixes, half-orc tribes. The choice given by the expeditionary force was always surrender or destruction. If a world chose destruction, Space Marines would descend and seize it by force. In a decade, the wolves' tally swelled. Axis and Russ together helped bring over 100 human worlds back into the Imperium's fold, an astonishing rate of conquest, one that outpaced the campaigns of many other Primarchs. The Great Crusade pushed forward, a massive engine chewing through the star lanes, incorporating new cogs into its war machine every day. 3 years ago, Axis's order for an Avenger-class super heavy cruiser from the Mars Mechanicum was delivered. The hull was Avenger-class, but larger than normal and fitted with a massive training hall. Axis's fleet now consisted of 3 ships, a light Dauntless-class cruiser, an Avenger-class super heavy cruiser, and a medium supply ship. The supply ship was about 5 kilometers long, but carried only mortals, supplies, and a human crew, no combat systems. Axis's Wolf Guard numbered over 1,300. The light cruiser carried 400 warriors, the super heavy cruiser carried 800, and the remaining 100 were stationed aboard the supply ship. The company Axis commanded was effectively a grand company and met the Space Wolves' basic standards, though it remained small compared to other grand companies, which often numbered 5,000 or 6,000. Over the last decade of the Great Crusade, the Emperor had recovered more and more Primarchs. In the 3rd year of Axis's service, Lion L. Johnson returned to the First Legion, which was restored and again took the name Dark Angels. Most of the planet's knightly orders were folded into the Dark Angels and underwent Astartes modification. 3 years later, Perturabo of the 4th Legion was recovered from Olympia, and the Iron Warriors welcomed their Primarch home. 5 years after that, Mortarion of the 14th was recovered. The Death Guard returned their Primarch, a taciturn man hardened by a poisonous world and deeply hostile to Psykers. 2 years later, Lorgar of the 17th Legion returned from Colchis. The Word-Bearers rejoined the Crusade. Lorgar's worship of the Emperor verged on the fanatical. He was already compiling a scripture he called the Lectitio Divinitatis. That had been only a year ago. Now more than half of the Empire's Primarchs had been restored. Axis's arrival had especially affected the fate of the 2nd Legion. Rather than being wiped out, after more than a decade of recovery, it had grown back to tens of thousands under the leadership of its Primarch Karl, and continued to fight in the Crusade. The embarrassing defeat at Raiden had been suppressed by Imperial censors. Official reports simply recorded heavy losses for the 2nd Legion. Only Leman Russ and the 2nd Primarch knew the true details. Others assumed the 2nd had been grievously wounded in battle. The return of so many Primarchs accelerated the nascent Empire's expansion. New worlds fell under Imperial rule at an almost geometric rate, a dozen or so each month. Axis's and Russ's mortal auxiliaries swelled many times over as reconquered human colonies provided troops. Mortal auxiliaries under Axis and Russ now numbered in the tens of millions, supported by hundreds of ships. The Space Wolves' Legion had grown to over 70,000 Space Marines. Russ's ideal Grand Company size was about 10,000, and he planned to cap the Space Wolves at roughly 150,000. There was also a secret Grand Company of fully mutated werewolves, the Werewolf Grand Company, but with Axis's arrival, their incidence had dropped to nearly 0. Perfected gene seed and key baptism had reduced mutations drastically. In more than a decade of crusade, fewer than 10 space wolves had erupted into a werewolf state in battle and been quietly sent back to Fenris by Russ. Those few werewolves were now imprisoned on Fenris and would never be released. Russ considered that a good outcome, at least the gene seed stock, would not be compromised by uncontrolled transformations. Key enhancement had changed the Space Wolves. All members were strengthened by Key. Physical fitness exceeded standardized levels by roughly 30% on average, and in some cases by 50%. Combat effectiveness rose accordingly. Where Wolfguard were already among the elite of all Space Marines, they were now almost unbeatable one-on-one. Their bodies had been trained close to their natural limits. The Thousand Suns had also benefited. Since awakening their psychic powers, they had stabilized rapidly. Axis kept open contact with Magnus. The two could communicate freely by psychic means so long as they stayed clear of warp storm zones. The Thousand Suns Legion now numbered over 30,000 and had become extremely reliable in battle. The latest modified warriors, after perfected gene seed implantation, were stable, though Magnus remained cautious. genetic mutations could still surface decades after implantation. Axis had created a special gene seed offspring cultivator for Magnus, who now served as Magnus's Lord Commander, effectively second only to him and commanding deference from tens of thousands of legionnaires. This unique cultivator's psychic strength and physical power were second only to Magnus himself. The entire legion accepted him. Magnus joked that anyone who disagreed could come and fight. The Thousand Sons were the only other legion, besides the Space Wolves, to receive key enhancement. How it was used within the legion was treated as a closely held secret. Axis's cultivation continued alongside the campaigns. He couldn't precisely quantify his overall strength, but his combat ability had increased significantly every year. Ki had reinforced both body and soul. Experiments on Ki's effect on spiritual strength had progressed. After over a decade of observation, Axis found that while Ki greatly strengthened a cultivator's soul, it did not create anything like an angelic halo from Tales of Other Worlds. Still, Kasha's soul strength had more than doubled under Axis's Kai, and her psychic power was now more than twice what it had been. The combined improvement of body and soul had pushed Kasha beyond even Mikado in raw strength. "Axis, are you sure about this?" Kasha asked. "Yes. After more than 10 years of cultivation, I can control my anger perfectly." "It's time to undergo that transformation," Axis said, nodding. His rage was under control now. His combat power had improved. His psychic power was increasingly fluent, and with his strengthened soul, the special brain core, and an enhanced mind, he believed he could channel the change safely. "Why not wait for Magnus?" Kasha suggested. "With both of you assisting psychically, if you lose control, we should still be able to pull you back." Over the years, Kasha had watched Axis unleash terrifying power. When he struck, entire enemy forces were annihilated. The devastation on a planetary scale often looked like exterminatus. If Russ hadn't imposed strict secrecy, Axis's name would likely have spread. Even so, other Primarchs speculated Russ might have some Golden Age secret weapon. Russ had already displayed an energy gun, battle suits, and combat power detectors. "Don't worry, you're the backup. I never attempt anything I'm not confident in," Axis said. "This time, I'll complete the transformation and keep my sanity." If Broly could maintain communication even in his transcended Super Saiyan state, Axis reasoned, a strengthened Saiyan like himself could do the same. "Then I support you," Kasha said. "In a few days we'll find an uninhabited planet, only you and I." Kasha had learned all the psychic techniques Magnus had taught her, and Axis's Ki had even activated traces of her immortal cells. Her recovery rate was approaching that of an immortal. With continued Ki nourishment, she believed she might one day become truly immortal, like her parents. As they spoke, Leman Russ summoned Axis to his ship. The two boarded a small transport and flew to Russ's flagship, Glory Queen. In Russ's reception hall were Space Wolves warriors and several mortal Navy officers. Essentially all the Wolf Lords had been called. Among them were more than a dozen strangers in red power armor carrying staves. Russ rose and nodded toward Axis. "Over 10 years ago, my fleet visited Prospero. Magnus and I had long discussions about his psychic intellect library proposal. I agreed and asked him to train a corps of intellect libraries for the Space Wolves. That training is now complete. 16 qualified intellect libraries will join our ranks." "You mean embedding Space Marine psychers in our companies?" one Wolf Lord asked. "Yes, there are 14 grand companies. I'll assign one intellect library to each. The remaining 2 will become my personal guards, joining my Wolf Guard," Russ said. "A more Fenrisian title would suit them better," a Wolf Lord from Fenris objected. "Intellect library sounds odd. Rune Priest is our tradition." Others from Fenris murmured agreement. "It's just a name," Russ said. "Although these children were raised on Prospero and trained there, their gene seed comes from me. They are your brothers. Make peace with them." Russ was concerned these Prosperan-born Astartes might not accept their new brethren. Axis was the first to speak on behalf of the 14th Grand Company. "On behalf of the 14th, I welcome the Intellect Library to my Wolf Guard." He quickly chose the one with the strongest psychic power from the group. When choosing, one naturally took the best. "Lord Axis, I have heard of you," the chosen Intellect Library said. "Lord Magnus told us you also possess psychic power and communicate with him." That's right, Axis replied. You'll work closely with the warriors here. Tonight we'll host a welcome banquet for you. It was a rare and welcome addition. Axis's grand company finally had a true psyker. Until now, Kasha had filled that role. The new intellect library bowed. It's an honor, Lord Wolf Lord. Inspired by Axis's lead, the other Wolf Lords chose their intellect libraries as well, and agreed they would be known among the Space Wolves as rune priests from this day forward. Chapter 94, Librarian Mater, the strongest of the Space Wolves. To welcome their new intellect librarian, or, more accurately, their new rune priest, Wolf Lord Axis held a grand banquet aboard the Avenger-class battleship. Space Marines from the other two ships had been summoned as well. Under Axis's lead, everyone raised their cups to the new brother. Introduce yourself. Tell us your name, age, and hobbies. You'll be a member of the Wolf Guard now, Axis said, eyes on the librarian standing before him. Great Wolf Lord, my name is Mater. I'm a psyker born on Prospero. I underwent the neophyte augmentation 15 years ago, and I've just turned 30. As for hobbies, I enjoy studying different psychic practices, Mater replied, standing and bowing. In the quiet of his own mind, Mater felt the odd twist of fate that had brought him here. By all rights, with his origin on Prospero and his psychic talent, he should have received Genefather Magnus's gene seed and become one of the Thousand Sons. 15 years earlier, when he was about to undergo the perilous neophyte surgery, an operation with a 1 in 10 survival rate, someone had arrived on Prospero and placed a hand on his brow. A current of energy he would later come to know as Ki had flowed through him. He survived the augmentation, but the gene seed implanted in him was not Magnus's. It was Leman Russ's. He would become a space wolf. His training had otherwise followed the standard neophyte path, but after graduation, he and a dozen others had received private instruction from Genefather Magnus himself. Magnus had poured almost his best psychic tutelage into them, training them to a level that in some respects even surpassed many of Magnus's own legionaries. Magnus had been proud and told them they would be the first cohort of intellect librarians trained by the Thousand Sons, psychic guardians who would watch over their brothers, anticipate danger, and cleanse the warp. Now, standing before Axis, Mater felt complicated emotions. If that stranger hadn't come to Prospero, he might never have survived the augmentation at all. And yet now, he had joined the Space Wolves and found himself chosen by this Wolf Lord to be his personal librarian. "Ha! That won't do, Mater," Axis laughed, lifting his cup. "From today on, you need some new hobbies: drinking, eating meat, and fighting." "The Wolf Lord's right. Learn to drink with us," another Space Wolf added. "And as a new brother, you'll fight every one of us. No psychic tricks allowed." He clapped a gauntleted hand on Mater's shoulder. Mater rolled his eyes, looking at Axis with a mix of amusement and disbelief. He had heard rumors about the Space Wolves before joining, but these warriors were wilder than anything he had imagined. "Ha ha! You must learn our ways. Lukaku, come introduce yourself to our new brother. Let's have a Fenrisian wrestling match," Axis roared. "Wrestling! Wrestling!" The hall erupted as hundreds of Space Wolves slapped tables and cheered. "Brother, next we'll teach you the traditions of the Wolf Guard." Sergeant Lukaku stood, stripped off his armor, and hauled Mater to the center of the arena. If a librarian used psychic power against a regular space marine, the marine would be no match. One librarian could easily take down a dozen or more. But in pure physical contest, the odds shifted. These Wolf Guard had been amplified by Axis with Ki. In only a few rounds, Mater was battered black and blue. "Who am I? Where am I? Didn't they say this was a welcome? Why am I being beaten?" He wondered, bewildered. Despite the punishment, he felt no malice in the blows. Under his psychic senses, the Space Wolves radiated nothing but enthusiasm. This rough initiation was a Wolf Guard tradition, entirely different from what he had feared. He'd assumed the wider Imperium detested psychers, even hated them, but these brothers treated him as one of their own. During the revelry, he noticed two other psychers, his Wolf Lord himself and the striking woman seated beside Axis. As the evening went on, any anxiety about this new legion melted away. After the friendly melees, two Marines supported Mater back to Axis's side. Axis personally poured him mead to celebrate the arrival of the new librarian. "Ha! Mater, do you know who the mightiest warrior among the Space Wolves is?" a wolf asked, leaning back with a wine cup. Father Leman Russ, of course, Matter answered without hesitation. In his mind, above all others, the Primarch was the pinnacle of power. Wrong, the room roared. Another one fooled. Brothers, for every new recruit they say the same thing, but the truth is our strongest is not the Wolf Father. The others laughed. Every new brother was asked that question on arrival. Their answer was always the same, Russ, but in the Space Wolves' experience, the real apex was different. Mater paled. That can't be. Aside from the Emperor, the Primarch is the greatest being. It's a secret of the Wolf Guard, a sergeant said, patting Mater's shoulder. Keep it close. All the brothers trust you enough to tell you that. Outside, is Axis Wolflord still just a Wolf Lord? Or is our Wolf Father the most powerful of the wolves? His voice dropped conspiratorially. The truth about Ki and the Berserker transformations was guarded like the lore of lycanthropy. Don't doubt it, brother. Among us, Axis is the strongest, truly the most powerful human after the Emperor, another added. Axis merely smiled and patted Mater's shoulder. To the world, the top fighter remained Russ, but in the space of a decade, Axis had grown in ways few expected. The cultivators Duo and Thor, when channeling Ki, could challenge Russ. Their strength had even doubled after taking Gene Seed. If Russ themselves used psychic power, the scales might tip, for he had not neglected his psychic training over the years. But on the face of it, Axis, Duo, and Thor were the only ones who could stand toe-to-toe with him. The welcome feast ended late. Axis assigned Mater a cabin and the requisite mortal attendants. Later, when the hall had emptied, Axis spoke to Kasha. Kasha, how do you rate Mater's psychic strength? Not bad, she said. He's powerful for a psyker. A Space Marine's body, combined with a psyker's gifts and Prospero's teachings, he's several times stronger than psykers of the same rank. He's not even inferior to the way I used to be. Kasha said this with a hint of pride. Before she'd gone to Prospero, she had been formidable. Now she felt she could match Micardo. Good. Then he'll be part of our plan. He'll assist you. If I lose myself after a transformation, the two of you will be responsible for pulling me back. Axis said. Kasha blinked. Isn't that too much, Axis? He's just joined us, and you're entrusting him with something so important. There's an old saying, don't use someone you doubt, and don't doubt someone you use, Axis replied. We need him to integrate fully with the Wolf Guard. We can't hide this from him. Besides, I'll be using the Super Saiyan transformation on future battlefields. It will be exposed sooner or later. Axis distrusted the Empire's ways of secrecy. If you hid something, distrust festered. Confidence died for lack of trust. True brotherhood required openness. All right, I'll find time to speak to him and help him learn the transformation as well, Kasha said finally. No need, Axis cut in. I'll tell him myself. Early the next morning, Axis called Mater to his quarters and explained Ki and the transformation in blunt, careful terms. Mater listened, absorbing everything. Lord Axis, Mater said, I know about Ki. There's a Vice Lord Commander in the Thousand Suns who can use it. Then I entrust this to you, Axis said, meeting the librarian's gaze. If I break when I transform, you and Kasha will be responsible for waking me. Keep me anchored. Mater bowed his head. He had come from Prospero expecting one destiny, lived another, and now found himself caught up in secrets and loyalties that would bind him to these wolves. He accepted. 95. Super transformation. Intense pleasure. Axis Wolf Lord, you've come to the right person. When I was studying on Prospero, I learned a number of psychic rites with Magnus. Among them are spells to strengthen the spirit. I can lay them on you beforehand, Matter said. For 15 years, they'd studied everything they could. Magnus had taught them almost everything he knew, and the great library of Prospero had been open to them. Matter therefore knew several psychic rites to sharpen the mind and guard the soul. This was his first mission under Axis, and he intended to perform flawlessly. Then you'll be a great help. Go prepare. We'll leave shortly, Axis said, patting Matter on the shoulder. Kasha had also trained with Magnus, but only for a month. Time had been short, and she had learned only some of the advanced disciplines. Common wards and certain arcane psi forms still eluded her. Magnus hadn't yet compiled his Book of Magnus. When he did, Axis planned to get a copy or an imprint. Yes, Wolf Lord. 2 hours later, Axis, Kasha, and Mater boarded a small torpedo landing craft and headed for an uninhabited world on the edge of their star system. The planet lay dozens of astronomical units from the Space Wolves fleet, an ideal place for training. It was a dead world. Even its core had cooled. At the edge of a system, such a rock could become a defensive outpost. Nearer the star, a mining world. Here, however, it was perfect for what Axis intended. On the surface, Axis nodded to Mater. Begin. Axis Wolflord, I will now cast psychic blessings. Mater raised his staff and laid on a string of wards, spells to bolster Axis's spirit, clear his mind, and protect his brain. One after another, the rites flowed, leaving Axis's mind razor-sharp and his will steadier than before. Axis had always been a psyker to some degree, but the last decade had been given mostly to cultivating ki. His psychic power had only grown passively. He would have to learn more psychic arts in time. More tools never hurt. Kasha watched and committed every spell to memory. Time on Prospero had been too short. The psychic craft there was a treasure beyond words to a fledgling psyker. All right, Wolflord, I have cast all the mental defensive spells I know. You may begin your experiment, Mater reported. Good. One last task for you two. Kasha, Mater, together shield this planet with your psychic power. I don't want anything that happens here to be read or observed. Can you do it? To hide himself from prying eyes, those who sifted the warp, this was the only method Axis could think of. No problem, Wolflord. Miss Kasha and I will extend a psychic seal, Mater nodded. Good. Now you two get away from the surface immediately, Axis ordered. Kasha and Mater climbed back into the torpedo and rose away from the barren world. The planet had no atmosphere, but thanks to the Emperor's augmentations, Axis could survive in vacuum for a short while. He drew a breath and unleashed his rage. A terrifying golden aura bloomed from him. His hair shifted to a blue-red at first, his most controlled mimicry of the Super Saiyan state, and then erupted further. Years of training made this form something Axis could command without losing himself. He let the ki swell, his muscles inflating until his armor groaned and split. The golden light shimmered with a sickly green undercurrent. Roar! Axis unleashed a furious cry. An overwhelming wave of power shot skyward. The dead world's crust trembled. As his ki climbed, the planet bathed in a green wash. The sky and ground seemed to change color in an instant. His standard power armor shattered, stretched beyond its limits. Axis's height, once 2.1 meters, swelled to 3. He became a hulking mass of muscle, brutal and compact, and something wild and killing rose in him, a desire for destruction so raw it was almost a hunger. It brought a pleasure unlike anything Axis had known, a high so intense it eclipsed anything carnal. Kasha and Mater, hovering above, poured their psychic shields across the planet, trying to seal the commotion from any other gaze. The energy that bloomed below was unlike anything they had felt. Their bodies trembled, their legs gave. They dropped to their knees, sweat pouring from them, eyes wide with disbelief and a deep animal terror, an instinctive certainty they would die. This is. Mater steadied himself on his staff, but the terror ran through him like wildfire. He slumped to the deck, pale and shaking. Kasha fared slightly better, but still wiped cold sweat from her brow. Why did Axis's aura feel so savage and elemental? Why did it bring such a bone-deep dread? On the planet's surface, Axis pushed his ki to its limit. His upper garments burst away, his hair burned full gold green, and his eyes had turned milky white, pupils lost. A grin of sheer malice split his face. Ha! He condensed a sphere of green light in his palm and slammed it into the crust. The impact detonated. A quarter of the planet's surface sheared away in a thunderous explosion. From orbit, it looked as though something had been bitten from the world. Power limitless, intoxicating power, flowed through him. The transformation's exhilaration amplified everything. Destruction felt like release, small in scale at first, then magnified 1,000-fold. He hurled more green orbs, each blow tearing the landscape open. The planet groaned and fractured. I need to vent. Let me blast. Axis formed a massive sphere of energy and hurled it down. The light ball expanded into a luminous globe hundreds of meters across and struck. Boom, boom, the planet couldn't withstand it. Under a single strike, the dead world shattered into grit and cosmic dust. Ha! Axis laughed, drunk on the feeling. The rush was indescribable, so intense he wanted to annihilate another world to celebrate. Far beyond the material, in the warp itself, something watched. An evil god turned its attention, drawn like a moth to a flame by the raw, unprecedented note of pleasure Axis exhaled, a thrill that rang across the immaterial and touched hungry eyes. As the god of pleasure, joy, and beauty, Slaanesh had experienced every exquisite sensation the universe could offer. Yet this was new. Since her birth, she had savored all manner of delights, but this was different. Not the artificial thrill of drugs or manufactured stimuli, but a raw, uncontrollable excitement rising from within a living body. Alongside that elation, there was a ferocity, a lust for destruction, a pure, wicked hunger. This was the exhilaration of combat, the thrill of annihilation, primitive and savage. The Dark Prince in her pleasure palace rose from the grand bed and peered into real space, intent on finding the source of that intoxicating new sensation. Axis stood amid the rubble of a ruined world, golden-green hair blazing, and unleashed another colossal surge of energy that pulverized the planet's remnants. Ha! I want to destroy more. No, if there were a powerful opponent right now, that would be perfect. He roared with a joy that was almost religious. He had expected that rising to Super Saiyan would turn his mind into pure rage. Instead, he found he could still think. Only his self-awareness sat under the sway of a stronger, deeper pleasure. If he had lacked his unusual brain and heart, the psychic power and the guard of his soul, he would have slipped entirely into this craze and begun destroying everything in sight. When he vented his Kai, his brain flooded with dopamine. The sensation was like a drug high, all-consuming, euphoric, addictive. Axis couldn't help comparing it to the legendary Super Saiyan tales he'd heard. He had imagined something like a rampaging Hulk, but the reality was an overwhelming intoxication. No wonder Broly and Kale became unhinged when they transformed. This was the kind of ecstasy that begged to be repeated, that demanded greater ruins and stronger foes until the craving was satisfied. Far away in the Thunderhawk gunship, Kasha and Matter had pulled a safe distance. "Miss Kasha, we should act. Lord Axis seems out of control," Mater said. Kasha frowned at the golden-green figure on the holoscreen, then shook her head. "If he were truly mad, we wouldn't have gotten away. But we need to contact him. This is causing too much trouble." The Imperium possessed planet-shattering weapons, even star-collapsing devices in the Golden Age, yet witnessing one man lay waste to worlds on his own was terrifying. Psykers were sensitive to such things, and both she and Mater felt just how different Axis had become, more demonic than any daemon. Kasha reached out with her psychic sight and hooked into Axis's mind. The instant she connected, her face flushed. The sensation was overwhelming, so exquisite, so intense. She stifled the onslaught and forced her voice steady. "Hey, Axis, what are you doing, you damn fool?" Axis, still basking in the afterglow, laughed. "Kasha, I was wrong. Super Saiyan isn't what I thought. This form, it's a different kind of state. If you still have your wits, get back to the ship. You've been in a vacuum for over an hour." Kasha snapped. Even a Primarch could not endure the vacuum for long. The cold of space would kill most beings. Axis, however, showed no ill effects. A fluorescent green protective field around him supplied perfect protection. "Ha! I still want to destroy another planet," Axis admitted. "Stop it. You've already destroyed one. Enough. One last strike. Disappear for me." Axis stretched out his hand and fired a full-power shockwave at a lifeless planet several astronomical units away. The blast vented nearly all his ki in a single, terrifying sweep, a green light wave with a comet-like tail streaking tens of thousands of meters. The target was enveloped and detonated in a display of searing fireworks. When the explosions died away, Axis's hair darkened back to black, and the transformation faded. He had finally expended all his energy. The Super Saiyan change, he realized, was essentially intense sensory stimulation, pure, carnal pleasure tied to destruction. No wonder Broly and Kale lost themselves. In this state, the only true relief came from wreaking havoc or defeating powerful foes until the surge subsided. Axis stretched and sank into the Thunderhawk seat, feeling as if he had run 100 kilometers and then soaked in a hot bath. Matter stared at him with a mix of admiration and fear. Axis's power went well beyond that of a gene-seed Primarch. To destroy 2 planets from several astronomical units away was a scale no Imperial weapon could match. A shot fired from a ship with that range would outclass any battleship salvo. Mater's awe was shadowed by dread. The Lord had just been the very embodiment of evil, more terrifying than any daemon, or perhaps his mind was playing tricks. He pushed the thought away, healed Axis's exhaustion with several psychic spells, and bowed out to rest. Kasha piloted them back to the fleet. The Space Wolves, farther off, hadn't witnessed the transformation directly. Only Axis and Mater had seen the full thing. Kasha knew her father had been right. Axis's combat prowess exceeded that of a Primarch. But the way he transformed was dangerously unconventional. That ecstatic sensation, if pursued, could be the path to corruption. She resolved to speak to him about controlling it as soon as she could. Unseen to Axis, Slaanesh had nearly picked him out. If he had not erected a psychic barrier in advance, if he had not left the state when he did, if he had killed living things in that moment, he would have been noticed. The sensation his transformation emitted was unlike anything Slaanesh had ever encountered. It drew her like a siren. The warp roiled. Purplish-red power spread, and a quarter of the Imperium thrummed with the pleasure god's agitation. All Slaaneshi demons felt their mistress's vexation. She hunted a new sensation and had come up empty. The shock of it unsettled other denizens of the warp. Some Imperial vessels navigating the Imperium were torn apart by the sudden storm. The Emperor, campaigning in another star system, felt the disturbance and frowned. Rogaldorn and Horus at his side exchanged puzzled looks. Rogaldorn, Horus, secure this system and order every nearby Imperial fleet to hold position. A violent storm has erupted in the warp. No ship may enter, the Emperor commanded. It was unmistakably Slaanesh. Why would she stir the warp so violently? The storm's reach covered domains under her dominion and threatened the progress of the Great Crusade. Nearby Primarchs and senior Psychers obeyed without hesitation. Every ship was instructed to withdraw from warp travel and remain in system until the storm abated. Fleets backing out of the warp complied, waiting out terrifying surge. Back aboard their cruiser, Axis and Kasha received Russ's order relayed through the Psyker channel. Wolf Lord Axis, Wolf Father has issued standing orders. A violent warp storm is currently active. We are to remain in system. Axis nodded. Understood. Notify the warriors. He thanked Mater for his help and dismissed him. Kasha pulled Axis into her chamber. Axis, this warp storm is almost certainly linked to you, she said. Don't be ridiculous, smile. How could it be? I'm not a warp entity, Axis replied, waving her off. I can sense the nature of the disturbance. It's Slaanesh, the same kind of intense pleasure you felt when you transformed. You must control that sensation, Axis. If you don't, you will be found. As the Emperor's daughter and a trained psyker, Kasha understood warp corruption more clearly than most. If one's power echoed a Chaos God's domain, the danger was immediate. They had both expected Khorne to notice anger tied to Axis's strength, but what his transformation broadcast was not pure rage so much as a destructive, annihilating lust that presented as a perverse bliss. That had drawn Slaanesh's attention. Axis listened, a dark humor tugging at him despite the warning. He had tried out the Super Saiyan form and nearly invited the attentions of the most perverse of the Chaos Pantheon. This universe was a twisted place. He closed his eyes and took in Kasha's words. I'll be careful, he said, and I'll increase my psychic defenses. Kasha nodded. That was all she could ask for. The Imperium would wait out the storm, and Axis would have to learn restraint, if not for the sake of propriety, then for the sake of survival. 97. Normal Super Saiyan transformation. Full power. One careless mistake, just one, could have left him prey to the Chaos Force small vendors that day. Those 4 rotten seeds were impossible to guard against. If he had transmigrated into some more ordinary universe that had the legendary Super Saiyan transformation, Axis could have smugly proclaimed, I'm not eating beef anymore, and laughed it off. But there was no getting around it. He was stuck in the Warhammer universe, a place where monsters ran rampant. If he hadn't come here, he would still be an ordinary Saiyan and never have been able to refine his gene seed into a Super Saiyan physique. Axis, the power you have now would be almost unrivaled in the normal universe, Kasha told him. Only an enemy you truly cannot beat should make you use it. Treat the Super Saiyan transformation as an absolute trump card, only for life or death situations. I know, Kasha. I understand the Chaos Gods better than you do. I won't take risks unless I'm certain, Axis replied. He knew how dangerous this universe was, and that knowledge made the Chaos Force small vendors all the more terrifying. If he hadn't understood that years ago, back when he first completed his transformations, he might have tried to use Super Saiyan much earlier. In this universe, even a small misstep risks corruption and total enslavement. And one of those corrupting fiends was particularly perverse. If you became his servant, you wouldn't just work for him and risk your life, you'd be toyed with. If you were a beautiful woman, maybe you'd bear it, but this fiend liked to play in ways Axis couldn't stomach. Sister S might peel your skin off, tie your intestines into knots, or shove a treasured sword into your body. Those were the kinds of things Sister S would do. That's fine. Oh, and Axis, find time to get new power armor from the armory. Is your old set broken again? Be more careful. In the last 10 years, you've destroyed at least 30 suits of power armor, including a Terminator set, Kasha sighed. After shattering a Terminator suit fighting orcs more than a decade earlier, Axis had been wearing only regular power armor in battle. The Space Wolves' treasury couldn't sustain his consumption. Every transformation tended to write off the armor he wore. Still, some missions demanded heavy protection. Certain environments were simply too dangerous to go without it. I'll be more careful, Axis laughed. Kasha only shook her head. When his armor was returned, she planned to modify it into a custode-style suit. Without the black carapace, Axis couldn't have worn Space Marine armor at all. Rest up today. Who knows when this warp storm will end, she added. For the next month, Axis and Leman Russ's fleet were stuck in that unfamiliar star system, supplied by an agricultural world and a hive world within it. After more than a month, the warp storm finally subsided. The Imperium's navigation and communications resumed. The Space Wolves received new combat missions, the fleet dove back into the warp, and months later, they reached another battlefield. This time, Axis did not fight alone. He led his wolf pack into battle in regular Space Marine power armor, chainsword in hand. He intended to hide his key, avoid drawing the attention of that one dead transvestite, the hermaphrodite who haunted his worries. Even without using key, however, Axis's physical prowess made him a god-slayer on the field. His wolf pack rose to prominence during the Great Crusade, becoming the most formidable pack among the Space Wolves. He did glorious deeds, won commendations from the Emperor, and other gene seed Primarchs knew the Space Wolves had produced a fearsome warrior. Over the years, Axis displayed his key only before his own pack or fellow Space Wolves, and only when necessary. 10 more years passed in a blink. 26 years since he joined the Great Crusade, and nearly 50 since his transmigration to the Warhammer universe. Half a century weighed on him oddly. If not for meeting the Emperor, he would have been old by now. The Emperor's modifications, however, had extended Axis's life into the tens of thousands of years. He had, to an extent, become nearly immortal. With the steady strengthening of his ki and years of conquest, Axis's body grew increasingly resilient. Leman Russ had been reassigned by the Emperor to missions with other gene seed Primarchs, but Axis was never brought along, by explicit order of the Emperor. According to his will, it was not yet time for Axis to meet the other Primarchs, and all of Axis's battle records were sealed. Mortal soldiers who witnessed his fighting had their memories erased. The power of Ki was to remain a secret, not exposed to enemies. Only 3 Primarchs knew of Axis's Kai: 2nd Primarch Karl, 15th Primarch Magnus, and 6th Primarch Leman Russ. Even they did not fully grasp Axis's strength. Axis had never fought at full power. Through the years of campaigning, Axis grew stronger daily. With tight control over his rage and consistent cultivation of his body, the S cells in his system multiplied and reached a critical threshold. A few years earlier, he had successfully transformed into a normal Super Saiyan. The change did not alter his height or build. His hair stood up and turned golden, and a golden aura surrounded him, clear gold, not the greenish tint of the legendary form. He felt a wave of anger wash through his mind, but it was under his control. He didn't need a special brain core or psychic aid to manage it. He could master this transformation by sheer will. The normal Super Saiyan state was very stable. Not as powerful as the legendary Super Saiyan, it made up for that with safety and predictability. The transformation boosted his combat power by roughly 50 times. From there, Axis trained methodically, a year to master Super Saiyan 2nd grade, Then Super Saiyan 3rd grade, the muscle-enhanced forms. In that mode, his muscles ballooned and consumed energy rapidly, slowing his speed. But those drawbacks were for ordinary Saiyans. A Super Saiyan's ki changed the equation. Speed and stamina favored him. He could treat that mode as a mini Super Saiyan for regular fighting, without the destructive frenzy of the legendary form. Following the training methods of Son Goku and his son, Axis kept the Super Saiyan form active almost constantly, except when sleeping. Half a year later, he reached Super Saiyan full power. His aura was totally contained, his form perfected. Kasha watched the golden-haired Axis and praised him. Perfect. This normal Super Saiyan is ideal. Not as powerful as the legendary, yes, but its advantage is safety. It is very stable, Axis agreed. My mind stays clear. There's no irrational bloodlust or destructive urge, just a small edge of anger that's fading with practice. He owed his progress to knowing the tried-and-true training methods. Without that knowledge, who knew how long it would have taken? Son Goku's path, it seemed, was still the most stable route to the normal Super Saiyan. Kasha added, Axis, this transformation is suitable for combat now. I thought so, he said, but out in the real universe, there are few things that would force me to use it. After reaching Super Saiyan full power, Axis also learned to manifest a partial Super Saiyan effect. His body could erupt in golden light while his hair remained unchanged. It was different from the cheap mimicry some used. This was a controlled partial channeling of Super Saiyan power when full transformation wasn't desirable. 98. Khorne and Old 11, random alien appears. Perhaps this transformation of yours could be used to hide your identity in the future, Kasha said, tapping her chin. Hide my identity? How would I hide my identity? Axis asked. First, when you transform, your hair turns gold, and you can choose not to let your ki aura show. With green pupils and golden hair, people who don't know you wouldn't recognize you. It's perfect for secret missions that need a disguise. Kasha explained. If he went on spy missions, no one would be able to tell. And his second muscle transformation wouldn't increase his height. It would simply make his muscles swell ridiculously, doubling his physique in a way others wouldn't immediately expect. It was the perfect cover. Forget it. I'm not interested, Axis said, shaking his head. Infiltration and subterfuge were not the way of a Saiyan. Even though he was a transmigrant, Axis was still at heart a proud Saiyan. Suit yourself. I was just saying. Maybe you'll have to do dirty work someday, things you can't be seen doing. When that day comes, you can go in that muscle form, Kasha shrugged. Axis pouted and said nothing. After reaching Super Saiyan full power, the next step was Super Saiyan 2. Super Saiyan 2 doubles the power of Super Saiyan, roughly 100-fold increase over base, and that was terrifying. The first through third stages and full power of a normal Super Saiyan didn't really affect the Transcended Super Saiyan state. In fact, Transcended Super Saiyan could enhance the third stage, preventing Axis's ki from bleeding out and keeping his speed up. From Super Saiyan 2 onward, though, things changed. Super Saiyan 2 was a watershed. You could stack Super Saiyan 2 on top of Transcended Super Saiyan, transforming into Super Saiyan 2 while already transcended, and the result was stronger than a typical legendary Super Saiyan. His body would keep the Transcended Super Saiyan physique, his hair would stand fully on end, and lightning would crackle around him. Forms above SS2, Super Saiyan 3, 4, God, could also be stacked on Transcended Super Saiyan. In Dragon Ball Heroes and other media, Broly had even reached Transcended SS2 and SS3 states. In some spin-offs, he used legendary SS4 or even Super Saiyan God. Axis didn't know the exact mechanics for SS2, though. One trigger for SS2 was the ability to sustain a deeper, more feral anger. When Gohan first went SS2, he became brutal, unrecognizable, and could have killed Cell, but instead toyed with him, a choice that cost Goku his life. Both Goku and Vegeta mastered SS2 through years of training in the gap between the Cell and Buu sagas. So Axis would have to rely on time and training. If he could truly unleash his anger, his legendary Super Saiyan aptitude should make SS2 easy for him. Then he could layer SS2 over Transcended and become terrifying. For now, he had to train step by step and let his power grow naturally. As a legendary Super Saiyan, his potential had no upper bound. Kasha, I heard the Emperor recovered 2 more Primarchs recently. Is that true? Axis asked, turning his head while sweating inside the gravity chamber. Yes, in recent years, the Emperor found 2 more Primarchs. One came from a grassland world, very backward, medieval, no firearms. His name is Chagatai Khan, the 5th Primarch. After his return, the 5th Legion was officially renamed the White Scars, Kasha said. Chagatai Khan, White Scars. Who's the other Primarch? Axis asked. The other is the 11th Primarch. He returned a few years earlier than Khan. He likes studying strange things and advocates peaceful coexistence with Xenos. My father and I have talked about him. My father doesn't like him much, Kasha replied. The Emperor's attitude toward the Primarchs varied. Horus had always been his favorite, but the others received different treatment. The 11th's interest in Xenos research reminded Axis of a theory he'd seen online before transmigrating. One of the reasons the 11th and 2nd Primarchs were purged was that one of them died at the hands of the Raiden, while the other was supposedly imprisoned by the Emperor for Xeno research. The Imperial Palace was said to contain a Cell 11. That cell now stood empty, and whether the 11th had ever been held there was a mystery. Timing suggested the Zidon War was coming. Chagatai Khan had just returned, and Lionel Johnson returned over 20 years ago. The Second Zidon War was looming. Axis's father, Lionel Johnson, and Chagatai Khan would be the ones to fight it. That battle had been brutal. An entire Astartes legion was said to have been annihilated. Rumor had it the wiped legion was the 11th. Some said the Ultramarines suddenly swelled in numbers afterward because the First Legion, the Dark Angels, suffered heavy losses, and some survivors or brainwashed troops of the 11th became Guilliman's recruits, swelling the Ultramarines' ranks. At present, the Emperor still hadn't reclaimed the Primarchs of the 8th, 12th, 19th, and 20th Legions. The 8th was that mysterious space Batman, the 19th the Raven King of the Raven Guard and the Night Lords, and the 12th was Angron. Axis wondered if the Emperor would remove Angron's butcher's nails when he returned. Without them, what path might Angron have taken? Since Axis's own transmigration, his presence had been nudging history. The butterfly's wings were fluttering wildly. Axis, I need to tell you something. My father said that once all the Primarchs return, the Emperor will hold a grand meeting at the front to discuss psychic matters, Kasha added. She wanted to give Axis a heads up. Her insistence that he conceal his key had been deliberate. A meeting with all the Primarchs? I'm curious, Axis said. You may not know, but Mortarion of the 14th and Rogel Dorn of the 7th are very opposed to Magnus's intellect library plan. They complained to my father, calling his research into psychic power blasphemous. Right now only Russ, Sanguinius, and Chagatai Khan openly support Magnus and the library. The rest of the Primarchs are ambiguous, neither for nor against. Father plans to discuss it when everyone has returned, Kasha explained. If the Primarchs were so hostile to psychic power, there was even less tolerance for Ki. If Axis exposed his Ki, Mortarion and Dorn would certainly target him. Magnus and the Thousand Sons were under pressure, but with the support they had, things were manageable. Axis nodded. Because of his appearance, Russ hadn't joined Dorn's faction in staunch opposition to psychic power, so the opposition lacked full strength. Not long after, fresh from a landing operation to bring an Imperial world under control, Axis and the others received an urgent message from Leman Russ, ordering Axis to report immediately. What's wrong, old man? Has something happened? Axis asked as he boarded Russ's flagship with Kasha. You're here, Axis. Yes, something's happened. And it's a tough nut. Leman Russ said, glancing at a mission report. A tough opponent? I'm looking forward to it, Axis grinned. The Raiden have returned. Those damned Xenos we beat 27 years ago have come back, Russ said. The Imperial frontier worlds had once again been attacked by Xeno lifeforms, the very Raiden the Empire had dispatched decades earlier. We're going to them? Axis asked. That's the Emperor's orders. The 6th Legion will go, joined by the 5th, now the White Scars, and the 1st, the Dark Angels, to handle the Raiden, Russ said. That's excellent. I can finally stretch my muscles. Can I burn their homeworld to the ground? Axis's smile turned savage. You can. This time you're our secret weapon, Russ said. Kaisa, all this is Father's plan, the Emperor had said. This second war against the Raiden must be won brilliantly. There's another reason I'm sending the Dark Angels and Chagatai Khan. Those two will keep Axis's secret. Other gene seed Primarchs might not. At this stage, I don't want Axis exposed to anyone. Dad, have you met Lion L. Johnson and Chagatai Khan before? Axis asked. There had been a few campaigns where Russ had been reassigned away from Axis, so Axis wasn't sure whether those meetings had actually happened. I met Lion L. Johnson once, but we never fought side by side. Same with Chagatai Khan, Russ answered. More often than not, he met the other Primarchs at the Emperor's behest to deepen bonds. During the Great Crusade, it was normal to go decades without seeing one another otherwise. Did you ever have a falling out with Lion? Axis pressed. Why would I fight him? He's the first gene seed Primarch, the elder brother to us all, Russ said, a touch puzzled. Axis's thought had been odd. Despite the Fenrisian ruthlessness, Axis had picked up more civilized manners than most assumed. Axis grinned. I asked on a whim. Your nicknames sort of match, Wolf King and Lion King. I thought you two might clash when you met. Russ laughed. Good thought. Maybe after we meet this time, I'll give him a proper scrap. He spoke half in jest, but half serious. Axis managed only a blank look. Whatever, as long as you're happy. Besides, the Space Wolves can now easily beat the first Dark Angels. In truth, Russ's brief encounter with Lionel Johnson had already started something much larger, a single flap of a butterfly's wing that would ripple outward. Before the Second Zayden campaign, Russ had attacked a stubborn human interstellar kingdom that had insulted the Emperor and refused submission. The war dragged on, and the Emperor sent Lion L. Johnson and the First Legion to reinforce Russ. But when Lion's boarding craft attempted to land, an accident and faulty targeting left them shot to pieces by the Space Wolves. Hundreds of Dark Angels boarding Marines were killed in an instant. Tempers flared. Some First Legion commanders even ordered their ships to fire on Russ. Russ personally boarded Lion's flagship to apologize, calming the situation. He also insisted on one thing: the king who had humiliated him and the Emperor must be personally beheaded by Russ. Lion agreed. In the closing stages of the campaign, however, the 13th Great Company, the Wolfen Legion, underwent a sudden, disastrous mutation. Russ went to deal with the Wolfen, and their transformation was exposed to the Dark Angels. By the time Russ reached the palace, Lion had already beheaded the king. Russ was furious. The two Primarchs dueled, well matched at first, and then Russ, in a sudden bout of Fenrisian laughter, let go of his anger. On Fenris, such duels were sacred. Russ's apparent trivialization enraged Lion L. Johnson. Lion felled Russ with a single blow and left with the Dark Angels without looking back. The Wolfen curse had been glimpsed by the First Legion, but Lion's secrecy was absolute and nothing leaked. After that, whenever the two legions met, they would name champions to duel in imitation of their Primarchs. That was the history of the Great Crusade, but after Axis appeared, that incident never came to pass. Axis had already murdered the king who had mocked the Emperor, shattering his palace and even a whole continent with a single key blast. If not for his restraint before being apprehended by Slaanesh, Axis could have destroyed the entire planet. With Axis, the ultimate weapon, a Saiyan, there was no planet the Space Wolves couldn't conquer. Campaigns no longer stalled. Whenever the Wolves hit a stalemate, Axis personally obliterated the obstacle. Hard, grinding battles simply ceased to exist for the Space Wolves. The perfect gene seed and the power of Ki had also helped. Ki could strengthen a warrior and mitigate the Wolfen curse. Outright mutations became rare. Those who did mutate were returned to Fenris and locked in the Wolfen dungeons, much like the Blood Angels' death companies. The Space Wolves' achievements skyrocketed. Axis's advance rate was unparalleled. For the Emperor this time, the Space Wolves would be the spearhead against the Raiden, with Lionel Johnson and Chagatai Khan in support. The Emperor still wanted Axis's true nature kept tightly controlled, so he chose supporting legions he trusted. Get ready, kid. Russ told Axis. This will be the Space Wolves' first time fighting alongside other legions. We need to make a good impression. Dad, if I win this war, do I get a reward? Axis asked. What reward do you want? Russ asked, amused. My Avenger-class cruiser is 10 years old. I want an upgrade. Maybe a Gloriana-class battleship, Axis answered confidently. Russ stared. You want a Gloriana? Those were the flagships the Emperor granted Primarchs. Impossible. At most, I can apply for an Apocalypse-class battleship. But Dad, If you don't ask the Emperor, you'll never know. I've earned enough merits over the years. I haven't asked for anything yet, just one Gloriana. The Emperor will give it. Russ folded his arms. You contact the Emperor yourself. If he agrees, then apply to Mars. But I am not applying for a Gloriana on your behalf. Axis huffed, then left for his Avenger to find Kasha. He told her about the upcoming campaign against the Raiden and his plan to demand a Gloriana-class battleship. Kasha thought for a moment. Over the last 2 decades, the Emperor's attitude toward her had softened. She no longer had to use formal titles. She could call him father. Axis's victories and the power he brought to the Great Crusade were immense. In effect, he'd matched the output of 2.5 Primarchs. Between Key and other gifts, a Gloriana felt deserved. Kasha also knew the Emperor had recently agreed to restore her status. Once the Primarchs were gathered, she would be reinstated as Imperial Princess. She had reason enough to back Axis. Don't wait, talk to your dad, Axis urged. Kasha nodded. She settled, entered the warp, and made contact. What is it, Kasha? Do you need something from me? The Emperor asked. Father, Axis and I will accompany Russ to Zidon. Axis wants to trade his merits for a Gloriana-class battleship, she said. The Emperor considered briefly, then surprised her by answering at once. I agree. Kasha's face lit up. A definite yes. How wonderful. I'll have Lionel Johnson bring his Gloriana, the Emperor added. Kasha blinked. But father, doesn't a Gloriana take decades to build? Why would Lion bring one? The Emperor's tone grew grave. Kasha, you've been with Axis for 26 years. There are things you must know, but you must promise not to tell Axis, not yet. Tell me, she urged. Axis's alterations on Holy Terra were not custodian surgical modifications. All of my genetic work on him was based on the gene seed Primarchs. Except for lacking my and your mother's bloodline, Axis is essentially a gene seed Primarch. The Emperor explained that the modifications had been carried out by him and Micardo. He'd even delayed the Great Crusade for the procedure. The results had justified the delay. Axis had become a surprise in the Crusade, even saving a second Primarch once thought lost. Kasha's head spun. So, he isn't your son by blood, but he is a gene seed Primarch? When he marries you, he will be my son, the Emperor replied. Everything was planned. Axis's own Gloriana began construction in the first year he underwent modification and was completed a year ago. Kasha felt the sudden certainty that her pairing with Axis had been orchestrated by her father. It explained why she'd been sent to him. Wire the weapon with family ties to control it was a pragmatic move. Does Axis also have an Astartes Legion? She asked quietly. The Emperor murmured. 100. Axis's gene seed is defective and will turn into a gorilla. The Lord of Mankind's answer stunned Kasha. She had only asked casually. She never expected that Axis actually had his own Astartes Legion. Father, do you mean to put Axis in command of that legion now? Will he return as a gene seed Primarch? She pressed eagerly. In her view, if Axis could be recognized as a newly appointed gene seed Primarch, the Imperium would accept him far more readily, especially now, when not all the Primarchs had fully returned. No, the Lord of Mankind said gravely. This particular Astartes Legion is still only taking shape. For now, Axis can only be given a Gloriana-class battleship as his initial force. Kasha sensed something else was wrong. Father, is there a problem with Axis's gene seed? The Emperor sighed, the rare, troubled expression betraying him. There are some very special circumstances. It turned out that during Axis's genetic modification, the Emperor had planned to extract his genetic material and create gene seeds. After Axis was developed, the remaining cultivation vessel was used to cultivate Axis's gene seed. The Emperor had hoped this would produce an Astartes Legion uniquely immune to warp corruption. Instead, the experiments delivered a harsh surprise. Axis's gene seed did indeed boost a recipient's combat power, at least doubling a normal Astartes' effectiveness, but it also brought devastating side effects. Once implanted, a highly aggressive special gene emerged and began assimilating the host's original genetic structure, mutating it increasingly toward Axis's template. Without an external reservoir of ki, the peculiar life energy Axis's race possessed, the modified warrior's bodily functions steadily degraded. As Axis's genes spread, the host would eventually become weaker than a normal Astartes. When the modified cells had entirely replaced the original tissue, the warrior would lose mobility and die. That was not the worst of it. On nights of the full moon, these modified troopers would undergo an even stranger mutation. They would suddenly become berserk great apes, 5 meters tall, whose physical attributes increased at least threefold. In that form, they were utterly insane, reduced to destroying everything in sight. Worse, each transformation accelerated their decline. Virtually none of the Astartes implanted with Axis's gene seed survived long after such a change. The Emperor's tests showed that subduing one of these berserk great apes required at least 2 custodians working together. A single custodian stood little chance. Axis's genes crave ki, the Emperor told Kasha. Without that energy, any warrior modified by his gene seed is doomed to a short life. They will either succumb to organ failure within months or self-destruct during a berserk transformation. The Emperor had tried repeatedly to utilize Axis's genes, cloning, approaches he considered taboo, every Astartes method he could think of, but all efforts failed. The results were either monsters worse than death or frail, defective creatures. Ki is everything. Axis's genes depend on it desperately. Kasha, do not tell Axis about this conversation, the Emperor added. Do not tell him that the modification he received was intended for a gene seed Primarch. Let him continue to believe he received a Custodes modification. Consider the Gloriana-class battleship. I grant him a reward for his contributions during the Great Crusade. Yes, Father, I understand. Kasha bowed inwardly, and the Emperor cut the psychic link. When she opened her eyes, Axis looked at her, worried. What happened? One moment you were joyful, then anxious, he asked. Her expression had been strange, off in a way he could feel. Kasha, I don't know how to say this, she began. The Emperor had ordered her to keep silent, but as Axis's lover, she instinctively wanted to tell him everything. She had learned much bedside. Axis's race was a subhuman people called Saiyans. She understood Super Saiyan transformations, even things the Emperor and Russ did not know. Axis had no secrets from her. If she kept anything, even with good intentions, she feared it would become a barrier between them. If you don't want to tell me, I won't force you, Axis said. Kasha took a breath. The Gloriana-class battleship is real. Father promised to give you one as your flagship. Lionel Johnson himself will deliver it. Axis brightened. That's great. I thought I'd have to wait. If I get that ship, does it mean a Gene Seed Primarch ship will be under my command? I asked Father that too, Kasha said, deciding to tell him everything. He told me something astonishing. The modification you received wasn't a Custodes procedure. It was at the level of a Gene Seed Primarch. He had already started building the Gloriana class long ago. Axis smiled wryly. I actually suspected something like that. The facility where I was modified was deep under the Imperial Palace, a secret lab with 20 empty chambers. Even then, I thought those might be for Primarchs. He wasn't foolish. He'd read enough to recognize the setup. He hadn't known for sure he'd been given Primarch-level modifications, or that his body would withstand them so perfectly, hence his emergence as a legendary Super Saiyan. Gene Seed Primarchs were effectively superhumans, and he, a Saiyan, had been catapulted to that level. Kasha continued. After Father finished cultivating you, he extracted your genetic material and produced your gene seed, then attempted to use it for Astartes modification. And then? Axis asked. If the hidden cultivation vessel beside him had been growing his gene seed, did that mean he had an Astartes legion? His own Saiyan legion? Kasha told him everything the Emperor had told her. Your gene seed is strange. It can be implanted successfully, but it causes multiple problems. Most alarmingly, on the night of the full moon, the recipients can turn into 5-meter great apes. Without ki, their bodies fail, and the transformations are fatal. Axis let out a bark of laughter. Of course that would happen. He knew Saiyan lore. The great ape transformation usually wiped out reason. 2 explanations existed for maintaining control. Either through training, after successive transformations, a Saiyan can learn to master the change, like Vegeta, or by royal blood, which alone grants the ability to control it. In Dragon Ball terms, only Vegeta and his family could freely handle it. Axis had always avoided testing it. Whenever he visited planets with moons, he wore special glasses to block the Blutz waves that trigger the change through the tail. His power was too dangerous. If he lost control and became a golden great ape or some super form, The devastation would be unimaginable, worse even than the legendary Super Saiyan state. He would never risk that without absolute certainty. If you transformed, you'd be enormous, far more than 5 meters, and your power would increase by an order of magnitude, Kasha said, imagining it. That would be terrifying. It would, Axis agreed. And without ki, my cells cannot survive that long. I can't guarantee I could control a berserk great ape. Just picture a golden great ape rampaging. It's no wonder the Emperor didn't want me to tell you. Why did you decide to tell me everything? Axis asked. Kasha smiled. Girls tend to side with their partners. I couldn't keep it from you. Of course, let Huang Laohan worry about it himself, Axis said. Huang Laohan? Kasha stared. Axis laughed. It sounds good, doesn't it? That's the nickname I gave your father.